That out front starts right now.
Out front next, breaking news. Special counsel Bob Mueller and top House investigators behind closed doors at this moment. Plus, President Trump speaks out on the death of an American held in North Korea. He says Otto Warmbier should have come home a long time ago. Tonight, Obama firing back. And more breaking news, the first results from Georgia's special congressional election moments away. It is a massive test for Trump. He's put his credibility on the line. Will he score a victory or take a hit this hour? Let's go out front. And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, the breaking news. Special counsel Bob Mueller turning up the heat in the Russia investigation tonight. Mueller on Capitol Hill this evening behind closed doors with the leader of the House Intelligence Committee. And as the investigation picks up steam, the White House tonight is actually dismissing the very idea that Russia meddled in the presidential election. Here's Sean Spicer this afternoon.
Does President Trump believe that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 elections?
I think I have not sat down and talked to him about that specific thing.
That comes as we are counting down to this week's deadline for the White House to produce tapes of the president's conversations with Jim Comey. Since Trump first tweeted that tapes may exist 5 weeks ago, the White House has continuously dodged questions of when we will know more about them.
Do tapes exist of your conversations with him?
Well, I'll tell you about that maybe sometime in the very near future.
The president made clear in the Rose Garden last week that he would have an announcement shortly.
He'll let us know. Everybody has to wait and see.
I think the president is going to address that in the week ahead.
The president has said that he will make an announcement on this.
It's absurd. Either there are no tapes or there are, and you should have produced them already. Where are they? We're going to get to that in just a moment. I want to begin, though, with the other breaking story this hour. Polls have just closed a minute and a half ago in the special election between Democrat Jon Ossoff and Republican Karen Handel in Georgia. It is the most important election since the presidential contest, a referendum on Trump himself. Brianna Keeler is out front in Georgia. And, Brianna, this is an election that matters in the White House and, frankly, around this country.
It's why so many people are paying attention, Aaron, including President Trump. Both of these candidates here, Karen Handel and Jon Ossoff, are trying to make this a local election. But there are so many eyes on District 6 here in Georgia as an indication about how people are feeling in what is a very red district. When you look back to November, it's pretty stunning because Tom Price, who ended up vacating this seat to be the Health and Human Services Secretary, and that's why they're having this election, he won re-election for his House seat by 23 points, but Donald Trump only bested Hillary Clinton by a point and change. So this is where Democrats have seen opportunity in this 30-year-old documentary filmmaker who used to be a congressional staffer, as he's up against in a neck-and-neck race with Karen Handel, who's the former Secretary of State here in Georgia. The question is, though, can you really extrapolate out what this will mean on the national scale? There is so much money here. It has broken records, over $50 million coming from the campaigns, coming from outside groups, and talking to a lot of Democrats and Republicans, they say it's tough to say because that really does mess with the math when you're looking to see how you could make this apply to the midterm elections. We'll see.
All right, Brianna, thank you very much. And as I said, results could come this hour. It would be, of course, a stunning upset if the Democrat were to win. We're going to get the early results in just a few moments, and we're going to bring them to you. A race being watched very closely by the president this hour, who has put his credibility on the line in tweet after tweet. I want to get now to the other breaking story at this hour, though. The special counsel, Bob Mueller, on Capitol Hill tonight, there to meet with the leaders of the House Intelligence Committee about the Russia probe. Manu Raju is on Capitol Hill tonight. And Manu, you've been breaking details on this tonight. You're learning more about this meeting and Bob Mueller going to Capitol Hill tonight.
Yeah, that's right. Leaders of the House Intelligence Committee just wrapped up a meeting that lasted over an hour in a classified briefing room on the House side of the Capitol. Just moments after that briefing, Mike Conaway, the Republican who's now leading this Russia investigation, said that they're trying to set up a system in which their investigation could move forward and which it would not conflict with what Bob Mueller, the special counsel, is now doing. Now, this comes as Mueller is making a round of meetings on Capitol Hill, meeting with the leaders of the Senate Intelligence Committee last week, and tomorrow tomorrow, meeting with leaders of the Senate Judiciary Committee. That committee now looking into the issue of FBI interference and questions about whether or not there was any obstruction by President Trump in the way he handled his firing of James Comey, and questions about his handling of the Michael Flynn investigation as well. So Bob Mueller now moving forward, making sure that the people on Capitol Hill do not conflict with his investigation in any way. One big reason why he's up here today, Aaron.
All right, Manu, thank you very much. And we're going to be joined by a member of the House Intelligence Committee to talk about that meeting that just wrapped up in just a moment. The amazing thing here is, though, that as this investigation is heating up, at the White House today, the press secretary, Sean Spicer, refused to say whether the president of the United States believes that Russia interfered with the election, which, of course, is an established fact by intelligence agencies in this country. Jim Acosta is out front at the White House. Jim, you were there for what really was a stunning moment.
That's right, Aaron. The cameras were on at the White House press briefing today, but it was still pretty opaque on the subject of Russia. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer could not answer whether the president believes Russia interfered in the last presidential election. Incredibly, he said, even though this is an issue that is crucial to the future of this presidency, he could not say, or he said that he has not spoken to the president about what his belief is on this issue. Here's how it went down.
Generally speaking, I mean, this conversation about Russian interference in our elections, there's 16 intelligence agencies that say that they did. The former FBI director said that without a doubt the Russians interfered.
I understand. I've seen the reports.
Does the president share those views?
I've not sat down and asked him about a specific reaction to him, so I'd be glad to touch base and get back to you. Yeah.
Didn't you say it was fake news, Sean? Didn't the president say that Russia was fake news?
And the president didn't want to answer our follow-up question, Aaron, because, of course, the president has, in fact, on multiple occasions referred to the Russia investigation as fake news. Now, we should point out there were other non-answers from Sean Spicer during the briefing today. He could not say whether or not the president has read the health care bill coming out of the Senate right now that is being crafted in the Senate right now. Just yesterday, he said he could not tell us whether or not the president believes in climate change. And as you noted at the top of this broadcast, they are still not saying whether or not the president has recordings of his conversation here at the White House. So the question goes on, where are the tapes? Aaron?
Where are those tapes? Thank you very much, Jim Acosta. And out front now, Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Speer, member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congresswoman, good to have you back. Let me start with the breaking news. Special Counsel Bob Mueller just wrapping up a briefing with the leaders of your committee tonight, coming in the early hours of this evening, spending about an hour with them. Are you able to tell us anything about it?
No, I actually can't confirm it, but I can tell you that deconfliction is a key component of the House Intelligence Committee being able to move forward and not to in any way create difficulty for the investigation that's being conducted by the special counsel.
So let me ask you this, because when you say deconfliction, that's what Manu was talking about. The special counsel obviously is trying to streamline this to, in his words, deconflict the various investigations. Do you think, Congresswoman, that your investigation in the House Intelligence Committee is interfering with Mueller's work in any way?
No, I actually do not. I mean, first of all, the special counsel is looking at criminal conduct, and the standard is obviously much higher. We're not even looking at any kind of an action being taken civilly or criminally. What we're looking at is what we are going to do to first improve the system in this country so that Russian hacking will never, ever happen again or have any impact on our elections. And secondly, to what extent there was any collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians.
Do you think that whether the president obstructed justice in any way, including with the firing of Jim Comey, should be part of your investigation?
I don't think we're at a point in our investigation that we can even venture there, because we are really at the very beginning of the investigation. We have yet to interview our very first witness. So until we interview the key witnesses, we're not going to be able to make that kind of an assessment.
All right. So let me just ask you on that point, though. When you say at the very early stages, there are some who say, come on, how can that be true? This has been 8 months of various investigations. We got multiple committees from yourself to the Senate to Judiciary. Now we've got Bob Mueller. How can it still be at the very beginning?
Well, because because you have to coordinate with the majority. You've got to agree on who's going to be called to answer, who can be on the witness list. There are questions that are sent out that they have to respond to before we do the interviews, because we want to have a foundation on which to ask questions. So it does take time. And remember, you know, if you go back to the Benghazi hearings, that went on for 2 to 3 years, and many interviews before they ever had their very first hearing.
Now, you just heard Sean Spicer say that he has not spoken to the president about whether Russians hacked the election. Do you believe Sean Spicer?
No, I don't believe Sean Spicer, and that's what makes this so problematic. We have the entire intelligence community, all 17 agencies, saying with high confidence that yes, the Russians hacked. And the president has done a mealy-mouthed response for every time he's asked the question, and now Sean Spicer is for all intents and purposes saying, well, I don't really even know. I mean, this is their effort to try and move away from what has been one of the greatest impacts on our democracy ever. Imagine if we had Russians working in the election departments as spies throughout our country. Would we just allow that to go on? And for all intents and purposes, that's exactly what happened.
Part of what will answer questions, of course, would be whether the President of the United States has tapes of his conversations with Jim Comey, right? As he intimated that he may have on Twitter when he brought this up 5 weeks ago. Your committee has put a deadline out this week, right? This Friday. You've said on Friday, White House, put out any recordings you may have of the president and the former FBI director, Jim Comey. Sean Spicer was also asked about the tapes today, Congresswoman, and here's what he said.
The president has said that he will make an announcement on this. I expect it this week. And so when he's ready to make that announcement, we'll let you know.
The president said soon, shortly, now it's this week. Look, your deadline is this week. Do you have any indication, Congresswoman, as to whether they are going to give you an answer, a hard and fast answer? Here's the tapes, or no, we completely misled the entire country about having tapes. Will you get that answer Friday?
Well, I think they're clearly signaling that they're going to have the answer by Friday. But this is very typical of the president. He said he was going to release his tax return all through his campaign as soon as the audit was over. And then after he was elected, he said, no, I'm not going to release my tax return. He always loves to create drama, and you either have tapes or you don't have tapes. And you should be able to admit that to the American people.
Yes.
I find his lack of trustworthiness really problematic.
Do you think he made the whole thing up when he raised the whole idea of tapes?
I absolutely do.
And now he's just strung everybody along for the drama of it because he made it up.
Yes. You know, we went from no drama Obama to drama every 10 seconds in this administration. It's really bringing our government to a halt because we can't do our work when we're constantly responding to, you know, the most recent tweet.
All right, Congresswoman, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And out front next, the special counsel adding new lawyers to his team today, including one who has a specialty, flipping witnesses. Who's the target? Plus, President Trump suggesting Obama is to blame for the death of a young American held captive in North Korea. And now, Obama firing back. And breaking news, we're moments away from those first results of the Georgia congressional race. Will Trump score a major victory or face a huge upset? New this hour, staffing up. Special counsel Robert Mueller is expanding his staff for the investigation into possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. There are now 13 lawyers who have been brought on to Mueller's investigation. The latest additions include Elizabeth Preligar, an attorney with the Solicitor General's office, and also joining a man with a skill that could be crucial for the investigation, getting a lot of attention. Laura Jarrett is out front. And Laura, this is Andrew Weissman, veteran federal prosecutor. Why is he such a key player?
Aaron, Weissman's peers tell me he's not only brilliant, but he's tenacious. He's investigated everything from Enron to tough cases against the mob. But sources say he has a particular knack for persuading witnesses to flip on each other and figuring out their pressure points. Back in the Enron case, Weissman charged the chief financial officer's wife in order to put pressure on her husband to testify, and it worked. Now, up until recently, Weissman led the Justice Department's criminal fraud unit, but perhaps most importantly, this is someone who special counsel Bob Mueller trusts. The two worked together back at the FBI. He was Mueller's general counsel, and so you could say this new team is something of a reunion.
All right. Thank you very much, Laura. Obviously significant there with that addition. Out front now, former Assistant Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security, Juliette Kayyem, and senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, David Drucker. Juliette, you heard Laura's reporting. Bob Mueller expanding his staff for the Russia investigation. How significant is this? We're now up to 13 attorneys.
I think it's significant just given the scope of expertise of Mueller's team now. So it's not just a group of prosecutors. They have specialties in financial dealings and financial and banking networks. And now with this hiring of Weissman, the sort of a focus on the capacity of getting someone to turn on a network or a conspiracy. So the idea that seems to be floating out there now that, oh, this has just become an obstruction of justice case and there's no underlying crime or they haven't found a smoking gun yet, I think is ridiculous at this stage. This team would not be put together, would not be investigating this much if it were just an obstruction case at this stage.
David, to that point, you just heard one of the people joining is a veteran prosecutor with this specific ability to flip witnesses, get somebody to turn against everybody else. How big of a concern is this for the White House?
Well, look, I think anytime you have a special counsel situation, a White House is going to be concerned. We have seen in the 90s with President Clinton and the Whitewater investigation, it starts over here and it ends over there. And the same thing happened in a way under President George W. Bush with the Plame affair, where they started looking for who leaked the name, and the person who did the leaking was never fingered, but somebody else took the fall for something else. So as a political matter, you have to be concerned and you have to deal with that. But look, Bob Mueller, I talk to Republicans on the Hill a lot, and I haven't found anybody to assail Mueller's credibility or his character. And if he's going to do a proper investigation that's going to have credibility, he has to assemble a team that can get it done. Otherwise, if he finds nothing, then people won't trust that result either.
Should people trust this, though? Juliette, I simply point to, Newt Gingrich coming out the other day with a tweet. Republicans are delusional if they think the special counsel is going to be fair. Look who he's hiring. Check the FEC reports. It's time to rethink. We checked those FEC reports. 3 members at least of the legal team that Mueller has assembled have given their political donations almost exclusively to Democrats. Is that an issue? Is there bias?
Well, Bob Mueller has been appointed mostly by Republicans and then was extended by President Obama. So at least the lead has some Republican cred. But I think it's pretty safe to say that Mueller does not read Newt Gingrich's tweets. I mean, his head is down. There's not he's just focused on what he can deliver and his obligation to deliver the truth. If you are on Trump's team, what you want is a thorough investigation so that this will go away and the administration and the White House can actually focus on work.
So, David, this comes as some Democrats are now saying that the fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn is cooperating. And obviously that's significant in many ways. But one of them could be that he, in exchange for his cooperation, is willing to, well, let's just say flip or turn or dish on somebody else. How big of a risk is Flynn?
Well, look, Flynn has been a problem for the president from the very beginning, and I can't understand the president's loyalty to Flynn because of that, because most of the president's problems with the Russia investigation, which is a serious matter that the president should want to get to the bottom of, really stems from Flynn, what he didn't tell the transition team, what he didn't tell the administration, and all of the things that we continue to find out about his foreign dealings. So clearly it's a concern. I think Democrats should be careful about getting ahead of themselves, because if they start to insinuate that more is going on than they're actually able to prove, then this investigation is going to look more political than maybe it is, and that's it's going to make it harder for Republicans and for voters out in the country who are skeptical and worried about it to actually believe that it is above board.
So Juliette, when David mentions the loyalty that the president has for General Flynn, he does. He's had it since the beginning, and he's had it even after he fired him. Here's a quick clip.
Michael Flynn, General Flynn, is a wonderful man. I do think he's a fine man. A truly great general right here. Mike, thank you.
If Flynn did something criminal, Juliette, is there any implication to the president because of that loyalty? And, of course, because of what the FBI director, Jim Comey, says the president asked, which was for him to drop the investigation into Flynn.
Yeah, I think so. But, just picking up on what David said, I just really respect that point. I don't think even Democrats should read too much into any part of this. We don't know if this investigation is going towards financial dealings or all the way to collusion. Because remember, Mueller also may be investigating data management in the campaign, things that are implicating Jared Kushner. So this is a wide investigation. The fact that Trump can't sort of drop Flynn is interesting. It may have something to do with Trump's personality. And I also think we are going to have to begin to discuss the potential that Trump may try to or may pardon some of these characters. He's allowed to do anticipatory pardons. They don't have to be charged with anything. And you do wonder, as this investigation continues and gets closer to people like Jared Kushner or Mike Flynn, what the president's move will be. Nothing shocks me anymore. And so that is, I think, maybe another shoe to drop.
Would that shock you, David, if he did that?
No, I don't think anything with this president shocks me. So much of the president's trouble is not so much what has happened, but how he handles what has happened. He fired James Comey. If he would have handled it differently and had things lined up, he might not have ended up in this mess. But that's just, what we've seen from the president over time, so it wouldn't shock me if it happened again.
And perhaps he wouldn't have ended up under investigation himself, which, of course, we understand that he now is after he fired Jim Comey so unceremoniously. Thank you both. Appreciate it. And next, the breaking news. U.S. spy satellites tonight spotting new activity at a North Korean nuclear test site. This comes as the president appears to blame Obama for the death of an American held by Kim Jong-un, and Obama firing back. And the results coming in from the Georgia congressional race. We are expecting the first ones to come in just a couple of moments. A major referendum on President Trump. First tally coming after this. Breaking news, CNN has learned that U.S. spy satellites have detected new activity at North Korea's underground nuclear test site. Officials say it is the only time that they have seen movement at the site in several weeks. Obviously significant given the timing. Concern that North Korea could carry out a test tomorrow, those officials tell us, to coincide with a visit by top Chinese officials to Washington. That would be a major, major step. And it comes as President Trump says the tragic death of Otto Warmbier, who was detained in North Korea, could have been prevented.
It's a total disgrace what happened to Otto. That should never, ever be allowed to happen. And frankly, if he were brought home sooner, I think the result would have been a lot different. He should have been brought home that same day.
Jim Acosta is out front at the White House. Jim, pretty forceful language. He should have been brought home that same day. Of course, that same day was under the watch of Barack Obama.
That's right, Aaron. You've heard the president criticize former President Obama over the Iran nuclear deal, the Paris Climate Agreement, Obamacare, and so on. But this takes the iciness between President Trump and President Obama to a whole new level, with the president at the White House today suggesting that former President Obama was somehow to blame for the death of Otto Warmbier. But get this, Aaron, he also seems to be acknowledging, the president is, that his own policy decision to have China get itself involved in all of this may not have worked out. We can put this tweet up on screen. It says, this came from the president earlier this afternoon. While I greatly appreciate the efforts of President Xi and China to help out with North Korea, it has not worked out. At least I know China tried. Aaron, that's a direct reference to the president's attempt earlier this year to get China and President Xi involved in prodding North Korea to restrain itself. Obviously, that apparently has not worked out. And keep in mind, the president traded some leniency toward China in exchange for that kind of cooperation. Remember, during the campaign, he promised to get tough on China on trade and declare them a currency manipulator and so on. And so the big question moving forward is, does the president want to move down that road when it comes to getting tough on China on trade? That would be obviously a very big development between the U.S. and China, but we should caution our viewers. We did reach out to some senior administration officials earlier today who essentially told us, Aaron, they don't know what the president was getting at in these tweets. So we'll be digging into this further. Aaron.
They, along with so many others on so many tweets. Thank you very much, Jim Acosta.
That's right.
And out front now, the former Deputy Secretary of State, National Security Advisor Tony Blinken, and CNN military analyst, former member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colonel Cedric Leighton. Tony, let me start with you. The president says that Otto should have been brought home the day he was taken hostage. He says the results would have been different if he were brought home sooner. Certainly sounds like he's blaming President Obama. And in fact, the former NSC spokesman has come out with an incredible forceful pushback on this, saying it was tireless efforts, that they freed 10 hostages. What do you say when you hear the President of the United States suggest the blame for this falls on President Obama.
You know, Aaron, this is not a time to be pointing fingers at other Americans. The fact of the matter is that North Korea is fully responsible for the death of Otto Warmbier. And as you reported just a few moments ago, it also looks like they're preparing another nuclear test. So the president ought to be focused on the fact that we still have 3 Americans who are being held in North Korea, and particularly egregious for our own national security, they continue to move forward in testing nuclear weapons and testing their missiles. That's where the focus should be, not on playing a blame game.
So Colonel, you know, Ned Price, who was President Obama's former national security spokesman, came out with a very forceful statement after the President Trump said this, in which he referred to the tireless efforts made by the Obama administration, he says, to free hostages. He says those efforts resulted in the release of at least 10 Americans from North Korean custody. 10 Americans. How can President Trump come out and seem to blame President Obama for Otto Warmbier himself, when, by the way, 2 Americans have been taken hostage since President Trump has taken office, and neither one of them have been released?
Well, that's true, Aaron, and one of the big issues here is, you know, you have to be very careful where you lay blame in a situation like this, because it could just as easily happen to any administration. The idea that an American could be taken hostage, especially by a regime like North Korea's, is something that has to be at the forefront of every president's mind, and you have to be very careful with playing with something like this. And I think it's very important for them to realize also that we have to get these remaining 3 Americans out before we do anything else.
So, Colonel, the new satellite images that Tony just referred to, activity that we haven't seen in weeks at the main underground nuclear testing site, how significant is this if they go ahead and do a nuclear test right now?
Oh, that would be very significant, Aaron, and the reason it's so significant is it would basically be a slap in the face not only to the United States, but also a slap in the face to China, the Republic of Korea, Japan, and even Russia. It would basically be North Korea's statement that they're going rogue and they're proud of it and they're going to stay rogue and they'll do whatever they want to do, regardless of world opinion and anything else that could get in their way.
Tony, of course, the big question here is what will President Trump do? He has to decide whether to retaliate to the death of Otto Warmbier. It is a major decision. You now have this possible nuclear test looming. We know that the President of the United States has made the decision for a military strike based on emotion already, right? The images of children in Syria. President Trump said that is what moved him to strike Assad. Tonight, we have obtained video of a very moving speech from Otto Warmbier at his high school graduation. I want to play a clip.
This is our season finale. This is the end of one great show, but just the beginning to hundreds of new spin-offs. No matter where we go or what we do, though, we will always have this group here. Even when Wyoming's class of 2013 is a thing of the past, we'll have the support of all of these people around us. We'll have the knowledge we gained as a group, and we'll have the reruns, the memories we've created to be played over and over again.
Of course, Otto Warmbier is dead. He no longer has that to look forward to. It's an emotional thing to see, Tony. The president is emotional, clearly, about Otto. Could that prompt him to act militarily?
You know, Aaron, it breaks your heart to hear this incredibly eloquent young man whose life was cut short in the most horrific way. But you have to be clear-eyed about this, and the president's obligation is not to respond emotionally, as emotional as we all feel in the face of this death, but to respond very deliberately, to make sure that we have all of the stakeholders around the table laying out a strategy for dealing with the threat posed by North Korea. And it's both, as Cedric said, to get the 3 Americans who are still there out, but even more significantly in a way, to deal with this increasingly grave problem, which is their development of a nuclear weapon on an ICBM that could hit the United States. We have maybe a year or 2 left before they have that technology. And that would be in the hands of a leader who acts at best impulsively and maybe even irrationally. So what's really critical now is for the president very calmly, very deliberately, to make sure that we have a strategy in place to try to prevent this from happening.
All right. Thank you both. I appreciate it. And out front next, the breaking news. Polls closing moments ago in that record Georgia House race. The first results are coming in. We're going to bring them to you. John King at the wall. And more breaking news. The leaders of the House Intelligence Committee have just released a statement on their meeting with Special Counsel Bob Mueller tonight. I have the details. We're going to bring you that next. Breaking news, we have new information on that meeting between Special Counsel Bob Mueller and House Intel leaders tonight. The heads of that committee have just issued a statement, and in it they say, quote, "We had a productive meeting with Special Counsel Mueller this afternoon to deconflict our concurrent investigations and look forward to continuing our dialogue with him as both investigations progress." Out front now, John Avlon, our political analyst and editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, Dana Bash, chief political correspondent, Mark Preston, senior political analyst. Dana, let me start with you. The significance here, of course, is the word deconflict. What does that mean?
It means that we have multiple investigations going on. You have the special counsel investigation led by Robert Mueller, which came after what was already happening on Capitol Hill, the House investigation and the Senate investigation. Now, deconflict basically means, in layman's terms, not step all over each other. Even though they're, maybe talking to similar witnesses, looking at similar documentation, things like that, they do have very different missions. To have and when I say different missions, what Robert Mueller is ultimately looking at is whether or not there are any criminal charges that are going to be brought against anybody, whether any laws were broken that reached that level. What the House and Senate, but particularly the House, and those are the leaders that he met with today, what they're charged with is getting the public information about the Russian attempts to affect the U.S. election. So that's basically the discussion.
It's interesting, John, though, when they use the word deconflict, that it seems, and Mueller, he had a meeting with the Senate Intelligence Committee. Now he's gone over tonight at 5:30 this afternoon for over an hour-long meeting with the chairman and the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Tomorrow it's Judiciary. He is very much, in a sense, taking charge of all of this. Yes. Who's doing what and in what way? That is an investigation that is taking form and gathering momentum, it would seem.
Absolutely. He's staffing up with very serious folks, and what it seems to be doing, that word deconflict is the key word of the statement, right? And what it could mean is, for example, House, Senate, don't worry about obstruction of justice. I got that. You focus on more narrow missions. We'll see what he says at the judiciary tomorrow. But it does seem to say, look, let's not both be pulling in the same direction. Let's have these be complementary investigations, not ones that are going to end up duplicating work while Mueller really staffs up.
And what do you say, Mark, to the fact that this is now going to be the third meeting in about 24 or 36 hours that he's had with these committees? As we now have learned, he's hired even more attorneys. He's got 13 in his fleet.
Listen, I think it's critical right now that you're having these investigations work concurrently or on parallel tracks. Could you imagine if the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Intelligence Committee was going to war with the independent counsel when it came to information, when it came to witnesses?
They all want to talk to the same people.
Correct. And Dan is absolutely right. What Congress's job to do is to figure out, is to gather information, to present it to all their colleagues to figure out if there is anything that is impeachable, right? However, if you go to the other side, what Mueller's looking for is there any indictments? Has anyone done anything criminally? So that is critical.
And can I just add one thing, Aaron, and that is that there is a history of Congress and an independent counsel, in that case, bumping into one another, and that's Iran-Contra. Congress had a special committee. It was different because it was a big, large committee looking into it, the Iran-Contra investigation, but they gave Oliver North immunity, and ultimately that ended up really messing up the criminal probe into Oliver North, and it allowed him to get off because of the immunity that Congress gave. So that is probably a kind of a prime example of how and why these two entities would want to deconflict.
All right, and of course proof that Bob Mueller knows what he's doing, and he is not taking anything for granted or anything by chance. Our breaking news coverage of this continues, and the breaking news, the first results of that crucial Georgia special election that the President of the United States has weighed in on even multiple times today. John King at the Magic Wall with those first results next. Breaking news right now. The first votes are coming in that Georgia special election. Let me show them to you. Republican Karen Handel is in the early lead, 51.4% of the vote. As you can see, though, only 26% reporting. That's just 3 counties, according to our John King. John Ossoff, the Democrat, 48.6. Very, very early here in the night. But, Dana, my understanding is that this does include what you see on your screen here, the 51.4 to 48.6, does include early voting, which was a crucial, crucial part of this election.
Very important part of this election, and early voting was much, much, much higher, we are told, now than it was even in the original election before what is now today, which is a runoff. And Republicans who I've been talking to have been really trying to step up their game in early voting. Historically, Aaron, Republicans have tried to back off of early voting because they would argue that it kind of cannibalized their own vote on Election Day. And that has changed in a big way. And this is a prime example. They have been working very, very hard, to get the Republican vote out early. So once we have more information about where these early votes are coming from, it will be a good indication as to how good the Republicans had been at early voting. And that will be a big indication as to whether Karen Handel, the Republican, can keep this seat in GOP hands.
Obviously, when you look at that screen, John Avalon, it is still early in the night, only 26% reporting. But nonetheless, that puts Karen Handel in the lead in what is the most closely watched and heavily invested in congressional race in this country.
That's right. $50 million have been spent in this congressional special election. What's so significant is Democrats felt they would have an edge on early voting coming in because of the enthusiasm among the grassroots base. A real frustration with Donald Trump in a district that, while Dave Price carried it handily, Trump only won by just over 1%. So this has been a prime knockoff. If Ossoff is not cleaning up in early voting, that could be a sign of a tough night for Democrats.
And let's just say here, Mark Preston, the President of the United States has put it all on the line, right? This is seen as a referendum of his presidency. He tweeted about this race 7 times in the past 2 days. 7 times in the past 2 days. Just this morning, he went out and tweeted. I mean, this Karen Handel for Congress, she will fight for lower taxes, great health care, strong security, a hard worker who will never give up. Vote today, right? It's a very traditional tweet. And then another one slamming John Ossoff, who wants to raise your taxes. The president has a lot on the line tonight.
He certainly does. And if you look at those tweets, those are basically rifle shots at Trump voters. Not a shotgun blast where he's trying to get the masses to come out and vote, but specifically to those people who supported him back in November that he thinks that he can get off their couches to go and vote for Karen Handel. In many ways, you got to give him some praise if you're a Republican for investing himself in this race.
Oftentimes, a lot of people told him not to do that, right?
Correct.
And he's been doing it again and again against their advice.
And we saw Barack Obama do that. Quite frankly, if you go back to the past election, he was very careful about what races he got in, what races he didn't. So Trump is all in. Now, the question is it fair to say it's a referendum on his agenda? I don't necessarily think so, because if you look at what has happened so far this year, Republicans have already won 2 special elections. They're likely to win one in South Carolina tonight. So in the end, even if Democrats win, Republicans would have won 3 houses. Democrats will have won once one of these special elections. However, messaging. And if Democrats win, then that's going to be the big takeaway. How did they speak to voters, and how will that work in 2018?
But if the Republican wins, though, John Avalon, doesn't this show all this concern about the president's approval rating? The latest CBS has his approval rating at 36%. That's abysmal. But if this closely watched race, if the GOP wins, and the GOP's been winning race after race after race, does it show these approval ratings are either wrong or they do not matter?
I think it doesn't mean they don't matter. Handel's people have been very concerned about the way her candidacy is so tied to Trump. What I think it shows, though, is that even in a district, and here's what the thing to remember about this district has been drawn to be +9 Republican. That means it is 9 percentage points more Republican than the neutral district in America. So Republicans have been set up to succeed in this district.
Right. Even though Trump only won it by 1%.
That's right.
Dana just pointed out.
But Dave Price, the former incumbent, now HHS secretary, won it handily by double digits. And so that's the point, is that the fact Republicans are fighting so hard in a district they should win in a cakewalk is itself significant. Now, if all this money and all this Democratic enthusiasm focused on this district still can't come Democrats up over the top. That's a reality check, but it doesn't distract from the fact that Republicans have had to fight to hold on to the seat.
All right, thank you all, and we're going to keep waiting here if we get more. As I said, 26% reporting right now the lead to Karen Handel, the Republican. And next, more on Donald Trump elbowing his way into the world of Jeannie Moos. You're not going to believe what Jeannie has for you tonight. Breaking news, the first results there on your screen coming in from Georgia's special election. Republican Karen Handel in the early lead. That is a 51.4 to 48.6%. 26% reporting. That includes Fulton County for those watching and the early vote. We're going to keep you updated as these votes come in moment by moment. In the meantime, here's Jeannie Moos.
Let's call it the push and preen, an unforgettable moment from the NATO summit. Who does that? As one headline put it, Montenegro Prime Minister got between Donald Trump and camera.
Look at this guy. Wow.
But not everyone was laughing and cringing.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is one of the most embarrassing moments. They don't see it that way.
They refers to a focus group of Trump voters that Frank Luntz recently tested for CBS. Look what they do with their dials when shown the shove.
Brushing by the Prime Minister of Montenegro.
Hold it.
The approval level shoots up.
What the hell?
It's great. Because we love it. We're America.
We're rude?
No, we weren't rude. We're dominant.
They've been rude for years, sucking us dry.
It's our party.
Yeah, it was
We paid for this party.
Yes, we did.
After 8 years, he made America great again on the world stage.
Making America great sure grated on a lot of nerves back when the video went viral. You tiny, tiny, tiny little man, author J.K. Rowling tweeted at President Trump. Someone obligingly shrank the president to fit Rowling's description. It was the shove that launched 1,000 imitations.
What a jerk. No, I don't. Get out of the way. I got it. Got to adjust the jacket.
Imitations by late-night hosts. And impersonators.
Excuse me, get out of my way.
When push comes to shove, some Trump voters didn't even consider it to be a shove or a push.
I saw it as a maneuvering for position.
Which of these three is not a comedian?
Is he a president or a bridesmaid positioning to catch the bouquet?
That's the kind of shoving that belongs in the buffet line of Mar-a-Lago.
He was just going to the front of the line where he belonged.
To his voters, President Trump is no chicken.
You act like they just called your number at KFC. Me, that's mine, the 12-piece.
Jeannie Moos, CNN, New York.
Anderson starts next.
And good evening. Thanks for joining us. A lot happening tonight, not the least of which is happening as we speak. They are counting the votes in a special congressional election in the Atlanta area in Georgia. And safe to say, Georgia is on a lot of people's minds tonight in both parties. Georgia's 6th congressional district was held by Tom Price, who left to join the Trump administration. It's been held by Republicans, including Newt Gingrich, since 1979. Georgia, as you know, is a red state. The race between Republican Karen Handel and Democrat John Ossoff could not have been closer going in and has turned into the most expensive House race anywhere ever. Right now, Handel is leading Ossoff by about 2.5 points. Joining us now with more on what to expect and why this matters, Chief National Correspondent John King. So polls closed just at 7 p.m. John, what's the latest on this race?
The latest, Anderson, is let me first tell you to expect a long night. Then let's pull out to just Fulton County. We have some early votes from Fulton County, about 72,000 votes so far. This map you're looking at the moment is a bit misleading. I just want to draw a line for you. This is the 6th congressional district. Has a piece of Cobb County, has a piece of DeKalb County, has a big piece of northern Fulton County. There's nobody in this district down here, but the votes are being reported by Fulton County, so they come in on the map as in Fulton County. These are the votes up here. This is the number so far. 51% for the Republican, Karen Handel, 49% for the Democrat, John Ossoff. If it stays like that, what does that tell you? It tells you we have a close race. If Fulton County stays like that, this is about 72,000 early votes. This is a Republican area of the district, but John Ossoff did quite well here in the April runoff election. Our projections tell us that this is about what he has to do to stay competitive in the district. He can lose Fulton County, that part of the district, but he can only lose it by a couple of points. So if it stays 51-49, then we see what happens in Cobb County and DeKalb County. We're expecting early votes from those counties in the next half hour or so, and then we go on from there. So the very early results in a very competitive race tell us we have a very competitive race in what has become, Anderson, as you know, ground zero in American politics. Democrats think if John Ossoff can win this race, it sends not only a message here in a congressional district Republicans have held since the Jimmy Carter administration, but they also believe it sends a big national message. Republicans, they think Democrats would overstate the national impact, but trust me, they have put so much resources from the national party, from interested groups like the Chamber of Commerce, like other super PACs, help in to turn out votes in the final days. This has become a hugely competitive race, more than $50 million. And when we have the results late tonight and the reaction tomorrow morning, it will reset the national political debate. We just, at the moment, can't tell you how.
Yeah, I mean, let's just, mention that figure again. $50 million. We're talking about one congressional seat.
We're talking about one congressional seat, Anderson, but I want to go through one of the reasons why we're talking about this congressional seat. Number one, let me turn this off so I can pop this out for you and get you to take a look at this. Number one, we've seen this before. Democrats desperately want to win. Number one, if they lose this race, the morale crisis in the Democratic Party will be big because they lost Montana, they lost Kansas. Now, these are very Republican seats. What's the difference in this district in Georgia? Look at the difference in the education levels. Donald Trump struggled. Democrats tend to do well with highly educated suburban voters. This is one of the top 10 congressional districts in the country for the percentage of people who have bachelor's degrees or higher. So this is an area Democrats think they can do well. Here, we mentioned how much in recent days the president has been involved in this. Well, this is a tough district for the president. Look at this. The Republican congressional candidate who held this seat, Tom Price, now the health secretary, he won re-election with 60% of the vote. The president in a presidential year was only getting 48.3%. Mitt Romney, so much higher. John McCain, higher. So Donald Trump struggles with the kind of Republican voters that live in this red Republican district. So what Democrats are saying is if we can win here, well, there are 25, maybe 30, maybe 35 other districts across the country in 2018 that are red today, Republican districts today, that look close to this. So if the Democrats can win here, they think it really positions them. It will help with candidate recruitment. It will help with fundraising heading into 2018.
Yeah, all right. A lot to watch for. We'll be watching all throughout the night. John King, thanks. We're going to be following this throughout the broadcast, obviously, over the next 2 hours, and certainly well into the night, as John pointed out. As long as it takes for that, though, it is nothing compared to how long we've all been waiting for some other important answers, including one dating back to the last big election night.
Does President Trump believe that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 elections?
I think I have not sat down and talked to him about that specific thing. Obviously, we've been dealing with a lot of other issues today. I'd be glad to touch base.
Generally speaking, I mean, this conversation about Russian interference in our elections, there's 16 intelligence agencies that say that they did. The former FBI director said that without a doubt the Russians interfered.
I understand. I've seen the reports.
Does the president share those views?
I've not sat down and asked him about a specific reaction to him, so I'd be glad to touch base and get back to you.
So that was White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer today, his first time back at the podium in a while, not his first time uttering those words. And keeping him honest, this isn't even a tough one. Each and every agency, as you heard, in this country's intelligence community has already weighed in on this. Each and every one of them agrees. It happened. 16 agencies employing tens of thousands of professionals, spending tens of billions of dollars, have reached a conclusion, and the president is chief executive and commander-in-chief of them all. In some ways, the whole exercise of even asking Sean Spicer about this is sort of absurd. The president has all but spelled out his contempt for the notion that Russia meddled in the election, and he's even belittled the intelligence community for saying so. His statements and tweets suggest he thinks the answer is no, but Mr. Spicer won't answer the question. That one or any of these. Are there tapes of the president's conversations with James Comey? Do people contribute to global warming? Did President Obama wiretap President-elect Trump? Did voter fraud give Hillary Clinton the popular vote victory? Pretty simple questions, all of them a simple yes or no, but we're not getting that. And in fact, in many cases, Mr. Spicer says he hasn't even asked the president about it. At this point, we're asking him as much as a test of the administration's transparency as anything else. Though things like one sitting president wiretapping the incoming one would be kind of a big deal, kinda. So we keep on asking week after week, month after month, and Sean Spicer keeps on saying this.
I have not asked the president since the last time we spoke about this. And I haven't spoken to him on it about the reason. I don't know. I honestly haven't asked him that specific question. I said I have not had a discussion with him on the question. I haven't talked to the president specifically about this. Yeah, I have not had an opportunity to have that discussion. I have not asked him. I have not asked the president. I haven't asked him. Okay. And get back to you.
Well, the answers say nothing. They also kind of speak volumes. Jeff Zeleny is at the White House for us tonight. Is there a logical reason, Jeff, why Sean Spicer doesn't have an answer to these questions?
Well, I think logical, but also legal, Anderson. I mean, and that's what the realm that we are in right now. Sean Spicer clearly does not want to contradict anything the president has said here. But look, this is the third administration I've covered: the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration. Never have we seen a press secretary who responds like this, but it is because of the principle, because of the president, because he, as we know, is quite flexible and fluid on his views. So the White House press secretary and others speaking for him have intentionally taken the line of, I've not asked him about that, because they know he's changed his view. But on the issue of Russian interference in the election, this is something that happened 7 months ago. Election day was, and everyone in this town has stipulated to it. Republicans, Democrats, every member of every intelligence community, including people here at the White House. But Sean Spicer still did not feel confident enough to say the president believes that, because he's one of the few people left in this town who simply will not say that. But logical, I'm not sure. Legal, perhaps that's the reason he didn't say that today, Anderson.
What did Sean Spicer have to say when he was asked about what the president thinks of the health care bill?
Well, he said that the president is in favor of some type of health care reform. He wants the Senate to keep working on this. But he also, Sean Spicer did not deny that the president was critical of the House health care bill. Now, you'll remember that's the one that he was hailing and praising in the Rose Garden just a month and a half or so ago. But today he said the president wants a bill that has heart. He wants the Senate bill to be more generous. Well, that is a little bit of a, of a problem here, because the Senate is trying to work this out, but it's clear the president and the White House are not steeped in the details here. And Sean Spicer said the president has not seen the bill, or he does not believe the president has seen the bill. That's not surprising, because a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill haven't either.
And in terms of Sean Spicer's future, the White House, did Spicer clarify that at all today?
Sort of. I mean, he said that, look, he is on the helping find a new communications director, someone to lead the strategy of the communications strategy here. And we do know about a month or so ago the communications director left, so there is an open vacancy there. But the reality here is, whoever becomes the next press secretary, and there will be another press secretary at some point at some time, that is not the main challenge for this White House. It is the message. It is what they are talking about. No matter who is answering questions about the Russia investigation, they're going to have the same challenges, if you will, here. But Sean Spicer essentially said he's going to stay on. He refutes the idea that he's going to be pushed out. Several administration officials here say that he will be elevated, actually, into more of a behind-the-scenes role. We'll see what happens, Anderson, but I don't think any of this is imminent. For one, a lot of people do not want this job. For two, it is a very complicated job, because, again, the answers are complicated. The substance of this is all complicated. This is not a communications problem. This is a substance and issue problem with this investigation.
Yeah.
Anderson.
Jeff Zeleny. Jeff, thanks very much. Coming next to CNN's Manu Raja at the Capitol, where Russia Special Counsel Mueller appears to be trying to get on the same page with all the relevant investigative committees. So, Manu, do we know what Robert Mueller was hoping to accomplish on the Hill tonight, which is where he was?
Yeah, he met with the House Intelligence Committee leaders as part of his own probe into Russia meddling, and as well as these questions about obstruction of justice. The idea was to make sure that Mr. Mueller's investigation does not in any way conflict with what the House Intelligence Committee is trying to do, make sure that they're not overlapping in scheduling witnesses, and they're able to move forward in essentially separate paths. Now, this comes as Mueller has been making the rounds on Capitol. Did meet with the Senate Intelligence Committee last week. The leaders there, and also the Senate Judiciary Committee leaders tomorrow. And interestingly enough, Anderson, that committee is interested in probing the notion that there could have been some interference at the FBI, possibly even looking into obstruction of justice. And if that is what Mr. Mueller is investigating, there could be questions about what witnesses can come before the Senate Judiciary Committee and which ones that Mueller wants to interview himself, Anderson.
Right. Mueller also met with the Senate Intelligence Committee last week. Do we know where their investigation stands?
Well, right now they're in the process of trying to scheduling some key witnesses, Trump associates, people who may have had contacts with Russian officials during the campaign season. Mark Warner, the vice chairman of the committee, told me earlier today that he does not expect any of those big witnesses to actually come before the committee before the July 4th recess. That includes Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law. And I also had a chance to talk to Richard Burr, the chairman of the committee, about the scores of records that Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, has provided the Senate Intelligence Committee. I asked him if they was responsive to the committee's request. This is what he said. Are you satisfied with the documents that you've received from Michael Flynn? Has he been responsive to the committee's request?
We continue to work through documents that are supplied to us, and we're making a lot of progress.
Are you expecting to issue any more subpoenas either to him or any other people at this point?
We don't talk about issuing subpoenas. That's the House side that publicly puts those out. But we continue to invite people to come in, and we're ahead of what we had targeted for interviews.
So Burr saying that he believes that his efforts are actually moving ahead of his own internal schedule, but he would actually not rule out that this investigation, Anderson, is stretching into 2018, into the midterm election season. So it really just goes to show you that the investigators on Capitol Hill are really just starting to really dig into the data and still don't know if they need more information from Michael Flynn and others in order to answer a lot of the questions that they have, Anderson.
All right, Manaraj, appreciate the update. Earlier tonight, I spoke to Maine's Angus King, who's an independent member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator King, Special Counsel Bob Mueller was on the Hill meeting with leaders from the House Intelligence Committee. I understand he's going to meet with leaders in the Senate Judiciary tomorrow. Reportedly met with leaders in your committee last week. Can you say what is the purpose of those meetings? I mean, is it to figure out what the boundaries are between his investigation and your investigations?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The term I've used is deconfliction. It's to be sure that we don't step on each other's investigations. There are really different roles. Our committee's investigation is about the facts. What did the Russians do? How did they do it? And how do we prevent it from happening again? And also the question of whether there were contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians leading up to the election. His examination is more in the nature of were there laws broken? And so he's going to be looking in different areas than we are, but we want to be talking and communicating again. So, for example, we don't want to give immunity to somebody who would then be lost as a potential witness in his investigation. So we do have to keep communicating, and that's why you're seeing these meetings going on.
And the House Intelligence Committee, they set Friday as the deadline for the Trump administration to turn over any White House tapes if they exist. I mean, at this point, do you believe tapes exist? And if they do, is your committee also going to demand to hear them?
Well, of course, if they do, the answer is certainly yes. But frankly, at this point, I doubt it. There's been all this talk about it, and the president keeps sort of dropping hints and saying, well, you'll find out later and you'll learn something. But I'd be surprised if there were. Also, I think we have to stop using the word tapes and talk about recordings. I don't want anybody, sliding by this issue by saying, well, there are no tapes, but there are digital recordings. So if there is anything like that in the possession of the White House or the president, it should be immediately made available to Congress.
And yesterday, your fellow Judiciary Committee member, Senator Whitehouse, told CNN he believes Michael Flynn is already cooperating with the FBI's investigation. Do you have any information about that, or do you have any sense about that?
I don't have any sense about it. He has volunteered to talk on the condition, at least as of several weeks ago, he was looking for immunity.
Right.
Whether that's still the case, I don't know. I think he's a very important person for us to talk to on a whole lot of levels, and eventually I'm sure he will appear before the committee one way or the other.
When Sean Spicer says that he hasn't talked to the president about whether or not the president believes Russia tried to interfere in the election, do you buy that? I mean, isn't that precisely what his job is, to know or at least to find out what the president thinks?
Well, it surprises me for sure, and it fits in with Jeff Sessions last week saying all he knew about it was what he read in the paper, and Jim Comey saying that in 9 interactions with the president, he never really asked, what did they do, how did they do it, how do you know? This is pretty disturbing. It's very disturbing because this was a serious attack on our democracy, and at the top of the United States government, there ought to be a level of concern.
Yeah, and I think, if memory serves me, Sessions testified under oath last week that he had never had, that the president had never had a conversation with him about it or asked about it.
Well, and you know, I understand the administration's sensitivity, if you will, on this subject because of all the questions swirling around about the campaign and whether there were contacts with the Russians. But put that aside, there is no doubt that the Russians did this and that they're going to do it again. I mean, this is a serious danger to our country, and we need some leadership throughout the federal government, not just from Congress, but from the administration, to figure out what they did, how they did it, and mostly how we can prevent them from doing it again.
Yeah. Today, members of your committee told CNN that they'll be getting access to documents from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Unit as part of your Russia investigation. Can you say what exactly you're looking for?
Well, I can't, Anderson. I'm not going to talk about the specifics, but this is a request that we made some time ago, and apparently the Treasury has now indicated that we're going to get those documents. I don't want to leave you, Anderson, though, without talking about what we're going to be discussing in our hearing tomorrow, which is Russian attempts to get into state election systems. And this is an important part of this story, and it isn't, getting all that much attention because of all the drama around Trump and Comey and those kinds of things. But this is one of the things that worries me the most. They tried to get into state election systems, and they're going to try it again. They weren't doing it for fun. All the intelligence is they didn't change any votes, they didn't shift any votes. But as I say, they were practicing, and I'm very worried about 2018 and 2020, and that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, both with U.S. intelligence officials, but also with state election officials. This is a big deal.
Senator King, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Anderson.
Well, just ahead, we are just getting new results coming in from tonight's House race in Georgia. Democrat Jon Ossoff now pulling ahead. Is there an upset in the making? Details on that next. And later, for the first time, police video of the moments leading up to the fatal police shooting of Philando Castile. A jury acquitted the officer involved. The question is, will the video make you question the verdict? You'll have a chance to decide for yourself.
And the officer just...
New vote totals right now in Georgia's 6th district. Remember, it has been red since the Carter administration. Right now, Democrat Jon Ossoff has pulled ahead of Karen Handel, back now with John King. Where's the vote count at this point?
Let's take a look, Anderson. It is blue at the moment, as you mentioned, and that will encourage Democrats. But let me emphasize this is early. This is Georgia's 6th congressional district, as you noted. Red since the Carter administration, most recently won by Tom Price, who's now the Trump administration health secretary. That's why you have the special election. Jon Ossoff at the moment, the Democrat up 51% to 49%. But let me switch the map here to show you this district. Now I'm going to pop it out just a little bit more. The district encompasses 3 counties in the Atlanta suburbs. I'm going to draw a line here, and I'll tell you why in a second. This is the district north of the green line. Yes, you see votes coming in down here, out here, and down here. These are the counties: DeKalb County, Fulton County, Cobb County. When the votes come in from the counties, they populate the entire county, but the district is up here in this northern part. So what do we see so far early on? Number one, DeKalb County is the most Democratic area in the district. Jon Ossoff has to run it up big here. He is at the moment, 60 to 40. Again, this is just early votes. Over here in Cobb County, this is the most Republican area of the district. Karen Handel, the Republican, needs to run it up big in this part of the district. At the moment, early votes, 55-45. Not as big as his lead in DeKalb, but a good, healthy lead in the Republican district. So then, Fulton County is the largest part of the district. The northern part of Fulton County, right up here. Atlanta's in Fulton County, but that is not in the district. It's only up here in the suburbs that's part of the district. Right now, 51 for the Republican, 49 for the Democrat. That is where Jon Ossoff can end the night. This could be the one warning sign in the early results for Jon Ossoff Anderson, in the sense that if he ends the night losing by a point or two in Fulton County, as long as he does what he has to do in DeKalb County, he can win this seat still. To see this from the early voting, that might be a bit discouraging to the Democrats. In the very early voting, they had hoped to pull out to a bit of a lead up here, expecting that as Republicans get the election day vote. Republicans in a Republican district, you can expect more Republicans will show up on election day. So if there's a warning sign in the early results, it would be that. But I also want to caution, this is about 114,000 votes. These are all early votes. We think there's another 30 or so thousand early votes to be counted, and then you get into the election day voting, probably another 100 to 120,000 voters voting today. So if you go back out to the full district and look at the early results as I pull it out here, get rid of the green line so you're not distracted by it. This tells you early results. Everyone expected a very close race. The early results tell us get the espresso machine going.
All right, long night ahead. John King, thanks. We'll continue to check in with you. I want to bring in the panel: David Chalian, Gloria Borger, Mark Preston, Dana Bash. You know, David, as much as Sean Spicer was basically downplaying the importance of this, I mean, there's no doubt the White House is watching this closely.
Very closely. Just look at the president's Twitter feed over the last couple of days. He's clearly been focused on this race. And if Karen Handel wins, I'm sure he's going to take some credit. He did some fundraising for her early on in the race, out there on his Twitter machine supporting her. And so he'll certainly take some credit. But Sean Spicer may be trying to downplay Anderson. But honestly, if the Republicans hold this district, I think it's a very big boost for not just the president, but for Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. This will calm the waters to push on with health care and tax reform, the president's agenda.
And Gloria, the flip side of that, of course, is if the Democrat takes this, John Ossoff wins, it's a big boost for Democrats. Or at least they'll spin it as that.
Well, of course, and they should spin it as that, because this is a district that there shouldn't even be a race in, quite honestly, as John was pointing out. Since the Carter years, it's been Republican. And the impact would be for Democrats that they would really be able to recruit candidates more easily, because nothing succeeds like success here. I think they could be even more strident on health care. Health care was a huge issue in this race. And Ossoff really very much talking about being against the president's plan on health care reform. So I think the Democrats would take this and they would run with this right into 2018.
Dan, I mean, the president himself has made a big deal of other special elections in the last couple of months, praising Republican wins. Hard not to imagine him taking a victory lap and you know, arguably deserved.
No question. If, in fact, Karen Handel does pull it out, you bet he's going to take a victory lap. And, you know, deserved or not, Republicans will do it, just like Democrats would do the opposite if they won. But I have to say, you know, we've been talking about since the Carter administration how this has been a Republican district. Forget that. It's been a Republican district in much more recent history. Tom Price, who gave up the seat to be the HHS secretary, just last November, this past year, 23%. That's how much he won this district by. 2014, 32%. 2 years before that, 29%. This is not historically a swing district at all. So yes, the district has changed, to be fair, and Tom Price was a known quantity, and he didn't have a real opponent like the Democrats are running now. But it just kind of goes to show how the fact that this is kind of, from the Democrats' perspective, a tailor-made kind of district to take from Republicans in Trump years, meaning it's very wealthy, very high in terms of education, the kind of Republicans that they hope are turned off by a Trump presidency or a Trump Republican. Having said that, if in fact the Republican does end up winning, to go back to your original question, the president has every right to crow about it.
And Mark, if the Republicans do hold this, then it sort of weakens the Democrats' argument that in 2018 there's a bunch of other districts with similar makeup of voters that they think they can turn blue.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think we have to look at this in the totality of what we've seen so far. Republicans have already picked up 2 special elections, one in Montana, one in Kansas. Democrats thought they might have had a shot in Kansas, and then in some late-breaking news, if we all remember, where the Republican candidate assaulted a reporter, and they thought, Democrats thought they could capitalize on that, but they didn't. Tonight also, there's another race going on in South Carolina that is going to go Republican. So let's look at it in totality at this point, is that if Republicans do win tonight in Georgia and in South Carolina, to David's point, you are going to see a calming of the waters. Democrats, though, even if they win tonight, and it will be a big moral victory for them, and I think, I mean, that is not to be understated or overstated by any stretch of the imagination. There will be internal fighting, though, within the party about what messaging actually worked, because Ossoff hasn't necessarily run as this big liberal, right? I mean, he's really run as a centrist, kind of a quiet candidate, just being very careful what he says about. We already know that there's a fight within the party between the more centrist Democrats, pragmatic establishment types, and really the revolutionaries, the Bernie Sanders one. So the fight will go on no matter what happens.
It's also, David, just incredible when you think about the money poured into you. I mean, $50 million in, you know, just for this one seat, and whoever wins tonight is going to have to run again for a full term, you know, just like every other member of the House is going to.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't know how it'll end up, and I was doing a little calculation before, thinking that maybe the winner of this race will end up having spent somewhere between $150 to $250 per vote. So, I mean, a ton of money has poured into this race. There's no doubt about it. That will not be the same in every race going forward. That's one of the things that makes this a unique environment.
All right, we're going to check in with all of you a little later on as more numbers come in, as we await for election results. We have more breaking news up ahead. What the family of Otto Warmbier is now saying about an autopsy. He's obviously the American student held captive by North Korea who was released in a coma The Trump administration is under pressure to try to take some form of action against North Korea in some way for his death. The question is, what exactly can they do? That ahead. There's more breaking news tonight. 2 U.S. officials tell CNN that American spy satellites have detected new activity at North Korea's underground nuclear testing site. This comes with outrage growing over the death of American Otto Warmbier, who was held captive by North Korea, released just days ago in a coma. President Trump facing pressure to take some sort of action against Pyongyang. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, what President Trump said today about Otto Warmbier's death.
It's a total disgrace what happened to Otto. That should never, ever be allowed to happen. And frankly, if he were brought home sooner, I think the result would have been a lot different. He should have been brought home that same day.
The Obama administration is responding to that. Plus, Warmbier's parents have made a decision on his autopsy. Miguel Marquez joins us with the late details. So let's talk about Warmbier's family. They are electing not to have a full autopsy done. Is that right?
Yeah, they objected to the Hamilton County Coroner's Office performing an autopsy, and the Coroner's Office acceded to that request. It is not clear why they asked that an autopsy not be performed, but the Coroner's Office did say that they were still performing. They did an external examination. They are looking at medical records, and they are doing extensive interviews. They have not, they said, issued a cause and manner of death yet, but they did seem to leave open the possibility that a cause and manner of death could be concluded from the medical tests that have been done, the MRI scans that have been done, and the interviews that they are currently doing.
The doctors, who spoke did not seem to have a clear sense of what exactly led to the condition he returned to the U.S. in, right?
Yeah, they know it wasn't. Look, he was in a comatic sort of state because there was oxygen cut off to his brain. They know it wasn't because of some sort of traumatic physical event that happened that cut off blood to his brain. They did scans across all of his body. They looked at his soft tissue as well. There was no indication of choking or of drowning or anything that might speak to torture of Otto Warmbier. There was also no indication of botulism, which the North Koreans claimed was the issue, that he suffered botulism, took a sleeping pill, and then fell into this coma. So there is this sort of broad mystery still out there.
This has also obviously become politically charged as well.
Enormously. You have two very powerful voices, two Republican senators in Washington, John McCain and Marco Rubio, calling this murder straight out. The administration, for all the tough talk, are saying that he was unjustly imprisoned, says the Secretary of State. The president saying that it was brutal treatment, but they are stopping far short of the term murder. Clearly, there are 3 other Americans and a Canadian still in North Korea, locked up by them, that they would like to bring home. They don't want to make that situation worse.
Yeah, a lot to contend with. Miguel Marquez, thanks. Now the question about how the U.S. should take action, if any, against North Korea for Warmbier's death, and the accusation that the Trump administration could have been or could have done more to help him. Joining me now are CNN military and diplomatic analyst, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. He's a former State Department spokesperson and former Pentagon press secretary. He was in the Obama administration when Otto Warmbier was captured. Also with us is CNN senior political analyst David Gergen. Admiral, the president laying at least implicit blame for Warmbier's death at President Obama's feet. You were part of the Obama administration. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I take great issue with that, and that's kind of the way I read it as well when I heard him today. I mean, look, there was nothing more important to President Obama, or frankly Secretary Kerry while I was at the State Department, than the safety and security of Americans overseas. And though we weren't successful in getting Otto back, and I do believe the Trump administration should get credit for accomplishing that, it was not for lack of trying. It was not for lack of effort. Secretary Kerry personally was involved in trying to seek Otto's release. I can't tell you the number of times that when he brought it up directly with his Chinese counterpart and with others in the international community. This was something he worked very, very hard. We're all sorry that it didn't happen, and certainly sorry to see the result. And there's great regret over that. But again, it wasn't for lack of earnest effort.
David, multiple voices, particularly Republicans, calling this murder. What options does the Trump administration, does the U.S. have as far as any further action goes?
Well, I think they can redouble their efforts to get the Chinese to toughen up, to get tougher sanctions. The new South Korean government has been notably conciliatory toward North Korea. We may need their help to really strengthen things. But I also think, Anderson, we should be very, very cautious about overdoing it, about being overly aggressive and threatening war. It is a murder. And I think Republicans are right to be, right in there. Many Democrats are outraged, of course, as well. But I cannot imagine that Otto himself would want to see this, as horrible as it has been, to be a cause for warfare.
Admiral Kirby, I mean, the fact that there are still 3 Americans being detained by North Korea, does that change the calculus here? It makes it certainly, I assume, more complex.
I think it does change the calculus. I think it should change the calculus, Anderson. I mean, we do have these 3 Americans that we need to be mindful of. I agree with everything David said, and I agree with the Republicans who are calling this murder. This is a horrific act, but we need to be mindful as we move forward, whatever actions they take, that you don't make their situation, the situation of those 3, any worse than it already is.
And David, I mean, as someone who's dealt with North Korea from inside the White House and dealt with the issue during multiple administrations, what concerns you most about this situation?
I share the concern a great many people have in the foreign policy community, the Council on Foreign Relations types, for example, that we could stumble. We've got a madman, in control in North Korea. He's very inexperienced. He's very defensive. He could easily, if you corner him, he could snap back at us like a snake. And I think we have to be careful. The fear that so many have is that there could be miscalculations on both sides, that tempers could rise on both sides, and we could suddenly find ourselves, drifting, if not rushing, toward some sort of military action, and that could be catastrophic for the peninsula. 1 million people could lose their lives. Look particularly at South Korea, which is right at the gun sites of the North. So the biggest concern is that we, by miscalculation, this is something Kennedy worried about deep back in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Miscalculation can get you into war very easily, and a lot of people can die. And I think that we've got to be extremely careful now to not act emotionally, but to be very steely about this and tough.
Admiral Kirby, I mean, the difficulties of military action, obviously, as David said, I mean, the potential loss of life in South Korea, in the region, is enormous, and even just the tactical difficulty, the terrain is extremely difficult between the 2 countries.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be an enormous catastrophe if this broke into open conflict, and I don't think that's in anybody's interest, certainly not in our interest either. I mean, obviously, we have to be ready, and they are ready to fight tonight, as they say. There is a strong military presence there that's very, very capable, but I don't think it suits anybody to let it get to that point, and I do think there are other options here short of it. Look, if anything, Mr. Warmbier death should underscore the brutality of this regime, and it should even more clearly galvanize the international community to continue to try to put increased pressure on Pyongyang to do the right thing.
Yeah, Admiral Kirby, David Gergen, thank you.
You bet.
Up next, we're going to check back in with John King for the latest vote numbers in the most expensive congressional race in history, $50 million, Georgia's special election. Also, the latest on the GOP health care bill. They're planning on a vote next Thursday. So when will they actually reveal the bill to the American people? New returns coming in from the Georgia special election. Fewer than 900 votes now separating Jon Ossoff from Karen Handel. John King is running the numbers. He's going to join us shortly. No matter who wins in Georgia, the GOP wants to vote on its health care bill before lawmakers leave town for the July 4th recess. Now, the current target date is next Thursday, June 29th. But the question is there a real plan in place, or is it just saber rattling? For the latest, let's go to Phil Mattingly on Capitol Hill. So what is the timeline for this bill?
Well, Senate Republicans have moved into an all-out sprint, Anderson. There's no question about it. After weeks of closed-door meetings, very few details coming public or even really reaching the hands of the senators themselves, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell announcing today that there will be a discussion draft available and released publicly on Thursday. Now, the big open question here, Anderson, is where they actually stand on the policy. When you talk to senators, and I've spoken to a number of them today, Republican senators, all of whom will be expected, at least 50 of them, to vote for this bill if it's going to pass, they don't know where things stand on on things like the Medicaid expansion and the Affordable Care Act, where the Obamacare regulations will end up, how many of them will be cut back, even the structure of the tax credit. All still open questions. Now, we should get and will likely get answers to those on Thursday. But Anderson, until we get those answers, until the senators get those answers, it's tough to know whether this bill will pass at all, even though, as you note, Mitch McConnell has made very clear he wants a vote next week and he expects a vote next week.
The secrecy of this whole process, how is that playing on both sides of the aisle?
Well, look, Democrats have made no secret of their problem with this. They've taken to the Senate floor to decry the process. They've tried to slow up the Senate procedurally. Today, we even had 3 senators, Democratic senators, leave Capitol Hill trying to go to the Ford House office building where the CBO is located to get us a look at some of the various draft proposals that Republicans have sent over. They failed. But one of the more interesting elements here is where Republicans are, Anderson. They have made very clear on the rank and file side of things that they're not happy with how this has all gone. Take a listen.
What have you seen of the health care bill?
Haven't seen it.
Is that a problem?
Oh, no, never a problem. No, of course not. I always like to move forward with legislation that I haven't seen. That's one of the practices I've enjoyed around here.
Did you get any more clarification today, sir?
We had lots of conversations. Every lunch we have conversations. We have more and more conversations. It's wonderful, the conversations we have.
Does this make you you're going to not put your support behind this since there's no time to discuss?
I haven't seen it. How can I put my support behind it or not support it behind it if I haven't seen it?
But are you going to ask?
I know how frustrating that is to you, but I haven't seen it.
Right,
so how can I come down on something that I haven't seen?
It's not being written by us. It's apparently being written by a small handful of staffers for members of the Republican leadership in the Senate. So if you're frustrated by the lack of transparency in this process, I share your frustration. I share it wholeheartedly.
I understand if you couldn't quite pick that up, Senator McCain was being pretty sarcastic there. But the interesting element here was, the interesting element, though, out of both of those kind of sound bites was Senator Mike Lee of Utah. He is inside the original working group. He's a key player on this. He is a conservative that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell desperately kind of needs to come along. His frustration with this process on kind of procedural grounds, combined with his very clear frustration on the policy side of things, is certainly ominous right now. But I think the big question is this. Republicans can say they're frustrated all they want. They could change this process if they wanted to. It would only take 3, Anderson, to say, look, we have to have more time on this, and then they basically can't do anything but that. So far, we haven't seen that. That means everything is still on track. The big question remains, though, can they actually get 50 votes? And I'm told right now from Senate aides, Anderson, they don't have it. They've got more work to do.
All right, Phil Mattingly, appreciate the update. Now let's go back to John King for the latest results in Georgia's special election. How's it looking, John?
Anderson, a slow count so far. Let me pull it out. You can see, though, the district itself still shaded blue. Again, this is a Republican congressional district since the Carter administration. Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, up at the moment, but up by a very small margin. We're in the ballpark of 1,000 votes right now. I'm going to switch the map a little bit to show you, and I'm going to pop this back out to show you there are 3 counties in this district. This is the congressional district, north of this green line I've just drawn. Yes, when we get votes, they fill into the other parts of the counties, but the district is up here. So what changed since the last time we had this conversation? We've gotten a bit more of the early vote over here in DeKalb County. It's blue. It's the most Democratic area of the district. Jon Ossoff has to run it up here. At the moment, he's doing that, 60 to 40. That's the same percentage as before, but we have some more votes in from that area. Then you move over here. This is Cobb County, and again, no new votes here from the last time we talked. This is the most Republican area of this district. Karen Handel, the Republican candidate, needs to have a healthy lead here. At the moment, she has that. Fulton County is the most populous area of the district. And again, if you think Fulton County, you might be thinking about Atlanta. This is the district up here above the green line, out in the suburbs, out into the exurbs. This is the most Republican area of the district. Last we spoke, it was 51-49. There have been a few hundred more early votes have come in this area, a couple thousand more votes, early votes, and Karen Handel has stretched her lead a little bit. Don't draw any conclusions based on this, but if you're trying to read the tea leaves, that's encouraging for the Republican candidate in the sense that, remember, this has been a Republican district for a long time. Logic tells you Republicans like to vote on Election Day. Republicans should do well in the Election Day vote. Republicans working turnout in this district feel confident about the turnout today. So if you're Jon Ossoff, you wanted to be ahead or at least to be more competitive in the early vote. We're not done with the early vote in Fulton County. Maybe that will change. But right now, as you look at it, Anderson, shapes up as a very, very competitive race. If there's one warning sign at the Ossoff headquarters, it's that Karen Handel has that lead there. Jon Ossoff can end the night 52-48 in Fulton County if he does what he needs to do over here in DeKalb County. But the fact that he's not a little more space for him right now, It's a bit of a warning sign, but we got a long way to go.
Put this in context of the 2018 election, because they're going to have to, I mean, whoever wins is going to have to run again along with everybody else.
Right. Whoever wins this district has to run again next year. I don't think they'll spend $50 million in this district again next year, but you're right. That person would have to run. If the Democrat wins, they'd be running in a year where most people think first midterm election of a president is usually bad for the president's party. So perhaps if the Democrat wins, you don't get wiped out in the next election. That happens sometimes when you win a district that's not to your party. But let's take another way to look at this. I'm going to try to pull out the map here. I want to pull this off for you. I want to pull out to the map and come back and go up to 2018. And see if I can find these districts for you here. This, according to the Cook Political Report, and they're across the country. It's a little hard to look at a big national map like this, but this is 35, 36 of what are considered the most competitive congressional districts as you head into 2018. Now, 2018 is a long ways off, but a lot of these districts are in states, like up here, that Hillary Clinton won. Up here, even Republican seats in places Hillary Clinton won, right? For example, across the bridge here, Northern Virginia, places Hillary Clinton won, the suburbs, just like this Atlanta district. So if the Democrat can win this suburban Atlanta district that has been red for so long, it's going to encourage Democrats in places like this. It'll help the party with candidate recruitment, for example. So as you look at 2018, people will look at the results in Atlanta, study that district, and try to find places across the country with competitive races as you get to those things. And Anderson, one more before I flip it back to you. I just want to show you this because this may be the only time I get to do this. There's also a special election in South Carolina tonight. In Atlanta, it's Tom Price, the Health and Human Services Secretary. Here in South Carolina, Mick Mulvaney, now the budget director for the Trump administration. His district is on the ballot tonight. At this moment, the Democrat is leading. If we end the night like this, I'll buy you whatever you want. That would be a shock if the Democrat holds on to that race in South Carolina. But early vote, a little bit of a lead there. Two races to watch. South Carolina, Georgia. We're going to be up a while.
All right. John King. John, thanks very much. We're going to check back in with John throughout the night. Up next, the recent acquittal of the Minnesota police officer in the shooting of Philando Castile provoked outrage among some, but only those involved in the case had actually seen the dash cam video of the shooting. It has now been released, and you'll see what it reveals ahead.
He's licensed to carry.
There was public outcry after a jury found a Minnesota police officer innocent in the killing of Philando Castile, not guilty. Many had seen the video live streamed on Facebook that Castile's girlfriend had took on her phone. Today, his dash cam video was made public for the first time. Ryan Young has the latest.
Sir, I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me.
Newly released dash cam video showing the crucial moments that led up to this deadly encounter last July.
You shot 4 bullets into him, sir. He was just getting his license and registration, sir.
The shooting of this man, 32-year-old Philando Castile, by St. Anthony police officer Geronimo Yanez, ignited nationwide protests over the use of force by police after Castile's girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, broadcast the shooting's horrific aftermath on Facebook last July.
Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead.
Just after 9 p.m. July 6 in Falcon Heights, a small predominantly white neighborhood outside of St. Paul, Minnesota, Officer Yanez stops Castile, believing he resembled a suspect in a robbery, and had a broken taillight. Diamond Reynolds is seated in the front passenger seat, her 4-year-old daughter in the back seat.
Reason I put you over, your brake lights are out. You have your license and insurance?
Castile could be seen handing Yanez what prosecutors in the officer's trial say was his insurance card, then telling the officer he also has a gun. The situation turning deadly in just seconds.
Sir, I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me. Don't reach for it, then. Don't pull it out. Don't pull it out. Don't pull it out!
Yanez fires 7 shots. 5 of them hit Castile, 2 in the heart. Yanez lets out a tirade of profanity as Reynolds begins her Facebook broadcast, narrating a video that would go on to be seen by millions.
I told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his head open.
Oh my God.
Also seen for the first time, Yanez's backup, Officer Joseph Kauser, positioned on the passenger side of Castile's car. His casual demeanor up until the moment of the shooting, prosecutors say, demonstrates he did not feel threatened during the traffic stop.
Don't pull it out.
Cowser told a Minnesota jury early this month he was unaware there was a firearm in the car and was surprised when he heard shots ring out because he didn't know Yanez had pulled his weapon, saying he did not hear the majority of Yanez's interaction with Castile and maintained he never saw a gun in the car. Also caught on camera moments after the shooting, statements Yanez made to fellow officers. And minutes later, this exchange between Yanez and a supervising female officer.
I told him to take his hands off of it, and then he had his grip a lot wider than a wallet, and I don't know where the gun was. He didn't tell me where the gun was.
Prosecutors say it was roughly 15 minutes after the shooting that Castile's gun was discovered in his right front pocket by an officer assisting with chest compressions on Castile. Yanez was found not guilty of second-degree manslaughter Friday and on 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm for endangering Reynolds and her daughter. Yanez testified last week he feared for his life because Castile put his hand on his firearm, not his wallet or identification, telling the jury, "I didn't want to shoot Mr. Castile. That wasn't my intention. I thought I was going to die."
And Ryan joins us. Now, do we know if Castile ever put his hand in his pocket?
That is the big question. We may never know the answer to that, Anderson, because the officer wasn't wearing a body camera, so you can't see from his perspective. All you know is that he said he felt like he was in danger. Then the video picks up, of course, on the inside, where millions of people have seen Reynolds' Facebook Live. And she says, of course, that when she talked to investigators on 3 different occasions, that 2 times she said he was reaching for his wallet. The 3rd time, she says she believed he was reaching for his seatbelt. Defense attorneys seized upon that, and that's something that made it very difficult during cross-examination when she was on the stand. Anderson?
Ryan Young, appreciate the update. Thanks very much. Up next, the latest vote numbers from Georgia. The breaking news, results coming in right now in a special congressional election that we've been following, and many see it as a leading indicator for 2018. It's not only getting national attention, it's drawn the biggest dollar contributions of any House election in U.S. history. We're talking about $50 million. Right now in Georgia's 6th House district, it is close, very close. You see the numbers there. CNN John King is tracking the results. He joins us once again. So let's just walk through the numbers, John.
It's still very close, Anderson, but significant since we last spoke. Georgia 6. Now red. You see it right there. John Ossoff had a narrow lead. He's the Democrat a short time ago. Karen Handel now has a narrow lead, about 500 votes or so. How did that change? So switch maps to show you the 3 counties in this district. Just want to pull it out. Fulton County is the largest county. The district is really, again, I'm sorry to have to do this every time we do this, but the votes come in from the county, so the entire county fills in, but the district is up here. And the thing that has changed is more votes have come in from the most Republican county in the district, this corner of Cobb County here, where Karen Handel has taken a bigger lead. She was up 55-45 with the first early votes. Some more votes have come in. Now she's up 57-43. It's exactly what she needs to do. That doesn't mean it will carry out through the night that way when we get the votes actually cast today. But as these early votes come in, what she needs to do, run it up in Cobb County, the most Republican part of the district, as much as she can, and she's doing that at the moment. You come over to DeKalb County. This is where John Ossoff has to run it up again. This is the most Democratic part of the district. This has not changed since last time we spoke, still 60-40 in that area. And the most populous part, again, is Fulton County, up here, not down in Atlanta, but up here in the northern part of the county. That hasn't changed since last we spoke, 52-48, again with the early vote. So they expected, Anderson, the early vote to come in. It started. We got most of that in now, and now we have a few more hours as we go through the vote actually cast today. Both campaigns say this is just the early numbers, planned for a long night. If you check in the 2 camps, who's feeling more confident right now? I would say it's definitely the Republicans, but again, it's early.
John, how do you spend $50 million on 1 congressional seat?
One of the local news stations down there, Anderson, actually added a newscast. So they could keep taking in the money from these. So a lot of it was on TV ads, a lot of it was on radio ads, a lot of it in the new age we live in, digital ads on social media, ads on Facebook, ads on, as you surf the web and the like. And then a lot of money in the final days on the ground, voter identification, making sure you turn people out, make sure you have multiple contacts with those voters, do everything you can. Old-fashioned literature in the mail. This is such a hotly contested race. They believe it will send such a national message that every last dime being spent, without a doubt.
All right, we'll watch it very closely over the next hour. I'll check back in with you. John, the president weighed in on the race this morning. As you might imagine, he's a Handel supporter. On other questions, though, the White House had less to say today. More on that and the rest of the day's developments from CNN's Jeff Zeleny.
The White House was hoping to change the subject today from the lingering cloud of the Russia investigation.
Good afternoon.
But during his first televised briefing in 8 days, Press Secretary Sean Spicer didn't help matters with this.
Just very plainly, a yes or no answer. Does President Trump believe that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 elections?
I think I have not sat down and talked to him about that specific thing. Obviously, we've been dealing with a lot of other issues today. I'd be glad to touch base.
Asked again, Spicer gave the same answer.
I've not sat down and asked him about his specific reaction to him, so I'd be glad to touch base and get back to you.
Keeping them honest, the entire U.S. intelligence community says Russia did interfere with the election. And the president's reluctance to acknowledge it has confounded his allies and armed his critics. It's also helped fuel the investigation on Capitol Hill and by a special counsel. Meeting with the president of Ukraine in the Oval Office today, Mr. Trump had strong words for North Korea about the death of Otto Warmbier, the University of Virginia student who died Monday. He'd been in a coma after 17 months in North Korean captivity.
It's a total disgrace what happened to Otto. That should never, ever be allowed to happen.
Mr. Trump implied President Obama was to blame, since Warmbier had been detained since January 2016.
Frankly, if he were brought home sooner, I think the result would have been a lot different. He should have been brought home that same day.
A former national security aide to President Obama said at least 10 Americans were released from North Korean custody during the last administration. It's painful that Mr. Warmbier was not among them, but our efforts on his behalf never ceased, even in the waning days of the administration, spokesman Ned Price said. All this while the biggest Republican priority, repealing and replacing Obamacare, is still under wraps in the Senate. After once hailing the House version of the bill during this jubilant Rose Garden event, the president lately has been describing it as heartless and mean.
The president clearly wants a bill that has heart in it.
Senate Democrats are seizing on the president's criticism.
I think President Trump summed up his health care bill best with one word: mean. For once, on the topic of health care, my colleagues and I find ourselves agreeing with the president. This bill is mean, very mean.
Jeff Zeleny joins us. Now, why, particularly on the issue of Russian hacking, Russian involvement, why is it so hard to get answers from this White House?
Anderson, they certainly aren't new questions. They've been out there for months and months now. It's been 7 months since Election Day. But we've seen the press secretary and other administration officials simply being unwilling to answer questions, largely because the president's answers are a moving target. We've seen him be very flexible in one use of the word here to be, answering these questions. So they do not want to speak for him because he may change his mind and suddenly throw them under the bus here. But it's also a legal matter now. Everything that is being said inside this White House from that podium could be used against this administration or in the investigation here. It's one of the reasons they're being so dodgy. It's one of the reasons we're seeing fewer press briefings than ever before. My guess is this one today will be the last one for a while. Anderson.
Jeff Zeleny, thanks very much. Let's bring in our panel: Susan Page, Matt Lewis, Kirsten Powers, Scott Jennings, and Jen Psaki. Scott, let's start with you. The entire U.S. intelligence community clearly believes Russia was involved in this. Does it make sense that the White House can't answer the question whether the president believes that?
Well, I do think it is true. There are a lot of things presidents don't discuss with their press secretaries. That's been true in every administration. And at some level, what Donald Trump has to say about it and what Sean Spicer has to say about it might just be conjecture. We know what the intelligence community thinks, and a lot of people believe they did try to meddle in the election. We also know there's an investigation going on. And so the conjecture of Donald Trump and Sean Spicer versus letting the investigation play out, I'd personally like to see the results of the investigation. That's more definitive than the conjecture of people who may not know.
But you have James Comey testifying that the president never really talked to him about it. You have the Attorney General also saying that he and the president have never really discussed it. It doesn't seem like anybody's actually trying to do anything about what Russia did. If that was an act of war, if it was, we have an election coming up in 2018, shouldn't the president be spearheading the U.S. intelligence community's efforts to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, I think that you have to let the investigation play out before you know what to do. I think it's extremely concerning. A lot of Republicans I know think the Russians tried to meddle. They think they tried to hack into state election systems. This is all extremely concerning. I don't think there's a lack of concern. I think, though, there is a need for more information before you can plot a strategy to try to stop it. So I don't take their answers to be anything other than we need these investigations to be finished, and then we can make some decisions and make some information available.
Jen, I mean, if the president never talked to his attorney general about it and has never talked to the then head of the FBI about it, that does seem to be a lack of concern, no?
Yes, and so I was still in the Obama administration when this was all happening, and we knew, and Donald Trump was briefed right after he was elected. The election happened 7.5 months ago. So beyond the investigation, what we're talking about here is not whether or not there's a decision about whether there was collusion. We're talking about how to prepare our systems, how to prepare our state governments, and what we should be doing 15 months out from the election. So as you mentioned, the Attorney General hasn't been briefed. No one has said that President Trump has raised this issue with them. That would lead anyone to conclude there haven't been national security meetings about it either, and that should be very concerning.
I mean, Kirsten, the idea of waiting until several years go by and the various investigations are over, that's like saying, wait, let's wait for the 9/11 Commission to finish its work before we figure out how to protect ourselves against al-Qaeda.
Right. It's the type of thing that you would think when you come into office would be one of the first questions you would ask. You'd say, we just had this really momentous thing happen that's very troubling and that was probably going to happen again unless we do something. And I want to find out, what's your best assessment of what happened and what are your recommendations about how to protect us moving forward. So the fact that the president has not, as far as we know, asked for any information about this, the fact that the Attorney General at no point has requested any information about this is very unusual.
Does it strike either of you as odd that the press secretary wouldn't have asked that question?
I think it's extraordinary. And I think if you look at previous White House operations, you don't see this lack of information, even times of war or impeachment or terrorism. And in fact, when there's a crisis, most White House operations try to increase the amount of information that they're putting out about what's going on, even when they don't know everything. That was certainly true after 9/11, that there was an effort to try to let Americans feel informed. It seems to me that this doesn't serve the interests of the press. It's very frustrating for the reporters. I don't think it serves the interests of the public. It certainly does not serve the interests of the White House itself to not do a better job of explaining what the president thinks and what he's going to do about it, whatever his position on it is.
And you both mentioned 9/11. Donald Trump made it a point to say, no, we have to call it what it is. We have to call it radical Islamism, because if you don't call it what it is, we can't really fight it if we're not at least willing to say what it is. Well, we can't admit that Russia, when everybody knows that Russia was behind this, then you could argue that how are we going to be prepared to handle it if we can't even acknowledge, if the president can't even acknowledge that Russia was behind trying to hack the election.
And we know consistently every national security official who's testified has said this is ongoing, that this is an effort that is ongoing.
And it's going to happen again.
And it's going to happen again. So we have elections this year. We have gubernatorial races. We obviously have a couple of special elections. We're about 16 months away from hundreds of members of Congress being up for election. The Russians are not out to keep the Republicans in power. They're out to create chaos and confusion in our system. They're doing that. There are things that could be done, addressing our cyber weaknesses, doing more to get our systems in place, working with governors at a statewide level, Democrats and Republicans. None of that seems to be happening. Maybe there's something we don't know, but that's exactly what they should be doing right now.
I think if we were preparing to combat the Russians and what they plan to do in the future based on what they've already done, we wouldn't be doing it out in the open. So I bet you there are meetings going on in the intelligence community to combat what we know they did. I would also point out, President Obama knew
But who's involved in those meetings if the former FBI director was not and the Attorney General was not?
Well, maybe they're not at liberty to discuss it publicly. I think she's right. There may be things going on we don't know. I will also just point out on urgency. President Obama knew this was going on and had been briefed on it before Election Day last year, but did not report it to the American people until after election.
Well, why should he talk about it if the current president isn't talking about it?
You were worried about urgency.
Right.
I'm saying that there may be reasons why presidents don't rush right out with everything they know
Well,
at the moment they know.
But there was an election going on. I mean,
Wouldn't
I
it have been
the more like? Well, I mean, you could debate whether or not he should have, but I don't think there's any question that if President Obama was still president, he would have.
And there was a conclusive statement put out by 17 intelligence agencies. Then he ordered a double-down review before the end of his administration. So the fact is, you pass the baton from one president to the next, and any president coming in, Democratic or Republican, should have been starting a process.
I just got CNN is projecting Republican Ralph Norman will win the special election in the South Carolina 5th Congressional District, defeating Democrat Archie Parnell in a closer than expected race to fill White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney's seat. Much more ahead tonight, including the breaking news from Capitol Hill on the secretive Senate health care bill. Even some Republicans think the process is wrong. Well, we heard from John McCain earlier. More ahead. In addition to the hotly contested and very closely watched Georgia House race, there is also a special House election tonight in South Carolina. We told you about it right before the break. CNN is projecting the Republican, as expected, will win it. And we have new numbers in Georgia for that. Let's go to John King. What are you looking at, John?
Anderson, you look at the map right now, John Ossoff ahead 51-49 if you look district-wide. Again, about half of the vote we think expected vote is in anyway. That's the full district. Let me break it down by county. And again, I'm going to be doing this throughout the night just the way the map fills in here. I want to pull this out to make it a little bit bigger. The congressional district is not all three of these counties. It's up here in the northern part of Fulton County. And here's his Cobb, and this is DeKalb. The biggest area for John Ossoff, one of the reasons he has the lead at the moment narrowly, is because he is running it up as expected. Now we have not only early vote, but some votes cast today are coming in. 59-41 in DeKalb County. It's the most Democratic area of the district. He needs to keep the numbers in the ballpark of something like that, run up the vote total here to help him over here, where you see Karen Handel holding. This number's been pretty consistent all night long, a 20-point lead, 60-40 in the most conservative part of the district, the northern corner here of Cobb County. And the most populous part is the northern part of Fulton County here, and Karen Handel ahead there at the moment, 53-47. If she can keep that lead, that bodes well for her. But at the moment, again, when you come back to the full district, John Ossoff ahead at the moment as we count the votes, and this is where now we have most of the early vote in Anderson, starting to get some of the vote cast today. This is a big turnout test for both parties. John Ossoff with a narrow lead right now. Remember early on back in April when you had that crowded field in the first election, John Ossoff started with it. He was above 60% at one point. He ended up winning the race just below 50% at 48%. So don't bet on this right now, but if you're the Democrats, John Ossoff leading 51-49. Still counting the votes, Anderson. We're going to be here for a little bit.
Yeah, although, a few minutes ago, Karen Handel was in the lead, so this thing is going back and forth.
It tells you you've got a very competitive district, and just the fact that it's competitive is news because this is a Republican district since the Carter administration. But after losing Montana, losing in Kansas, just losing in South Carolina, 4 Republican House members joined the Trump cabinet. There have been now, the 4 special elections will be done by the end of tonight. Republicans have held 3 of those seats. This is the one left in play. The Democrat leading at the moment. Stay with us.
All right, John King, we'll continue to watch. We're back now with the panel. Susan, I mean, should this race be so closely watched? Because, I mean, a lot, for both Republicans and Democrats, they're putting a lot into this, $50 million.
I think I speak for all of us in saying we've always watched GA-6 with great intensity, every election in the past. I'm not sure it should. You look at, remember Jack Murtha's special election was up in 2010, spring of 2010, really fiercely fought like this, seen as a big sign of how things were going to go in November. Democrats held on to that. Didn't matter. They lost control of the House in November anyway. And so you don't want to overinterpret this, but I think it has a huge effect. And if Karen Handel can hold on, I think that helps Mitch McConnell pass health care next week or whenever he brings it up for a vote. I think it is even if Democrats have a kind of moral victory that it was close in a district that didn't used to be close, I think it is somewhat reassuring to Republicans that they can figure out how to maneuver around President Trump and his low approval ratings and still hold on to their seats.
Matt, do you agree that it would help McConnell get health care done next week? And if so, why?
Well, I think that winning, nothing succeeds like success, right? And so if there's momentum, that could give some recalcitrant Republicans who are maybe getting a little bit of cold feet, a little bit worried about the voters, a little comfort. And I do think that although this isn't predictive, right, you can't extrapolate from, say, if Democrats win this, you can't extrapolate, well, this means that the House is going to go Democratic. I'll use a sort of a sports analogy. When a team is out of the game, you want to keep them out of the game. And if all of a sudden they make a good play, they score a touchdown, the crowd gets in the game now. Now they have momentum. That is what Republicans want to keep Democrats from getting. If Democrats win this race tonight, then all of a sudden you're going to have Democratic activists and candidates and donors who are excited and motivated, and that actually could have consequences.
That's the only sports analogy I've ever heard that I actually understand. So I appreciate that, as I know nothing about it. How important do you think this race is?
Well, I think it's already important no matter who wins, because I think if you are a Republican who has a wealthy, highly educated district, you're paying attention to this, because this is saying that there is a certain group of people that are unhappy with Donald Trump, because the only way that it gets this close is if Republican voters are crossing over. So, so I think even if she pulls it out, it doesn't look like it will be like by a lot. And so a certain segment of the Republican Party, I think, if they're not, should be sort of stepping back and going, okay, this is a little bit of a referendum, at least from a certain element of Republican voters. This isn't a super conservative district, but it is a Republican district, and it is one that will require Republican voters voting, crossing the line.
Scott, you don't look nervous.
I don't feel nervous because, number one, I think Karen Handel looks to me like she's in a pretty good spot right now. Number two, if the Democrats go on and lose this race, it is extraordinarily demoralizing. They've thrown everything but the kitchen sink at this race. The average congressional candidate who wins normally spends about $1.6 million.
That's incredible.
And Ossoff has spent, what, $25 million? If you can't win under these conditions with that amount of money, if you're sitting on the sidelines tonight as a possible Democratic candidate, wouldn't you say to yourself, I'm in a worse district than this. Why in the world should I even run? And so I think tonight the Democrats have more at stake than the Republicans, because if they lose, it is demoralizing to candidate recruitment efforts.
Okay.
Look, I think, one, there's a historic number of candidates expressing an interest in running, so many that there are going to be 10, even more, in a lot of districts around the country. I think Democrats will have to play a role in keeping the party energized and keeping people across the country energized who gave small dollar donations. But there are more than 90 districts who are more Democratic friendly, Democratic leaning than this district. So while we're going to have some work to do if we lose this race, this is by far, there are a lot of other opportunities. What's also,
although the Democratic Party has plenty of issues facing it, just in terms of internally of what is the Democratic Party, who are they?
No doubt about it, that's for sure. And what's interesting often about special elections is that they may not be an indicator of everything to come, but they can also be an opportunity to try things out. And in this race, healthcare is a huge issue. And the AJC poll, 81% of respondents care deeply about healthcare. So if the Democrat does win, that is going to be a big sign for Democrats to keep running on that issue too.
All right, I want to thank everybody. Up next, no answers to simple questions of the White House and how this White House compares to others when it comes to transparency. Keep them honest ahead.
It should never, ever.
Oh, we raised this at the top of the broadcast. The unwillingness of White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer to answer simple yes or no questions about matters big and small, all of which the president has either spoken or tweeted about already. Instead, Spicer says he hasn't asked the president. He hints or outright promises to ask, then never seems to. Keeping him honest, we're actually keeping a list of the questions. Are there tapes of the president's conversations with James Comey? Do people contribute to global warming? Does the president believe Russia meddled in the election? Did President Obama wiretap President-elect Trump? Did voter fraud give Hillary Clinton the popular vote victory? What's weird is that on all these questions, the president has already weighed in, either hinting at or flat out stating an answer. Yet when Sean Spicer is asked for a yes or no, he says he doesn't know and hasn't asked. Hence that list, which we just showed you, which we'll be showing whenever one of those questions is asked and answered, or the way it's been for months now when it's asked and not answered. Earlier this evening, I spoke about it with Washington Post Philip Rucker, CNN political analyst, and American Urban Radio's April Ryan, CNN's Jim Acosta, and presidential historian Douglas Brinkley. Jim, I just want to read something that you tweeted yesterday. You said, quote, "Call me old-fashioned, but I think the White House of the United States of America should have the backbone to answer questions on camera." The White House did do a briefing on camera today. There were still a number of questions, though, on Russia, notably, that Sean Spicer simply wouldn't answer.
Yeah, Anderson, I guess Rome wasn't built in a day. We did have the cameras on in the briefing room today, but we didn't exactly get all of the answers we were looking for, incredibly. And it's amazing to me that we didn't learn this until now. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said that he hadn't talked to the president about whether he believes Russia interfered in the presidential election. That left everybody with their jaws dropping. at the very end of that briefing. And I asked Sean, well, doesn't the president believe that Russia is fake news? He has tweeted that on occasion, the president has, that he believes the investigation is fake news, but he gave us no response to that.
April, what's interesting, I mean, if you know, in these no video, no audio briefings they're doing, if it's an attempt to control the message, it could just end up doing the opposite. Because when cameras and microphones are allowed, I mean, the words do speak for themselves.
The words do speak for themselves. And, you know, TV needs the camera, they need the video. Radio, we need the audio. There's so many different people who need quotes to go on the record. And when you don't have the audio, when you don't have the cameras, and when you do not have the permission from the White House principal or the press secretary to use the quotes, where's the story? What can you write? And it's really not about us. And Jim is actually right. But it's not about us. It's about the American public. If we indeed are not allowed to disseminate the message, the American people lose out. They do not find out about what's happening with this president, the leader of the free world, the man that is elected, the 45th president of the United States. So it is important that this process, this access continues to happen.
Phil, you wrote a really smart piece for the Washington Post in which you put the White House's attitude toward transparency into the wider context of what's actually happening across Washington.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we see this beyond just the White House. We see federal agencies in the Trump administration refusing to provide key documentation and answers to Congress in their hearings, but also in their requests from congressional overseers. And we also see in the Senate right now with the health care bill, it's being written by one senator, Mitch McConnell, the majority leader from Kentucky, a Republican, and some of his staff members. Fellow Republican senators have not seen this bill, and certainly the Democrats haven't.
And Doug, I mean, just historically, has there ever been a White House as wary of transparency as this one seems to be? Because, I mean, in one weird way, they are transparent in that Donald Trump tweets in real time, and you get kind of like a real-time Rorschach test of what's going on in his head. But in other ways, they're just not saying things.
No, I think no president has tried to obstruct the press the way Donald Trump has. He's constantly threatening them, calling them enemies of the people. Right after he won the election, he ran around New York and tried to get rid of the press corps from following him. He's at war with what he considers the mainstream media. Great presidents learn how to massage the press and use it to their benefit. The sense of Theodore Roosevelt with cartoonists, or FDR. You know, we used to call reporters in the White House, beg them to come and spin the globe and talk about what was happening in the world. Or John F. Kennedy using these press conference exchanges to boost his youthful and energetic image. Donald Trump does none of these things because he knows that he's not that quick on his feet, and that anytime he says something, he's giving people sort of rope to hang him. Hence, the tweets cause him trouble, but if he was doing going on the Sunday shows, he'd be giving more problems for his legal case.
Jim, could there be a trickle-down effect happening here? I mean, could the White House be setting the tone for the rest of the government, including Capitol Hill? I mean, to Phil's point?
Yeah, I think they are. And remember, it was just a week ago or so when the Senate Republicans tried to ban cameras from talking to reporters, people with cameras in the hallways, talking to senators. And that is an additional chilling effect. They eventually backed off from that. But to jump off of what Doug was saying, Anderson, I fear that there is some permanent damage being done to how we cover the presidency in this town. The president has refused to provide his tax returns. He has refused to provide health records that are really credible. I mean, the health records that they provided really are just not credible. They're not letting us look at the visitor logs. The president is not holding regular news conferences. And yesterday they tried this business of having an off-camera, no audio briefing. And so it's just a slow but sure chipping away at what we consider to be normal access and openness here in Washington. And my concern is no matter who comes in after Donald Trump, they are going to try to pull the same thing. And we're just going to allow them to do it because we said, well, it happened during the Trump administration. And so that's why, you know, it may come across as pushing a little too hard sometimes, but we have to stand our ground in this area. As April will say during these briefings that we're involved in, you know, we're here to ask the hard questions, and they are paid by us to answer those questions. And that's it. That's the bottom line.
April, how does it compare to prior administrations you've worked in?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Anderson. I started during the second term of Bill Clinton. And even in Bill Clinton's worst day, the press still had access. It was hard, but they still gave us information. And after each presidency, the access is lessened in so many different ways, but it's lessened. And now, really, I would say it's at its worst.
Phil, there's some who argue, that President Trump is a businessman without a background in public service, and that this may play a role when you own your own company, and certainly when you spin your own, legend, as he has in New York over the decades. You just, that's what you're used to doing.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and there's a temptation in sort of everything that somebody does in business or in their private life to try to shield yourself from scrutiny and exposure. But this is a totally different realm. He is a public servant. He was elected by the people. The leaders of the federal government here in Washington serve the public, and the public has a right to know what's happening. There's a demand for accountability in the public. This isn't a matter of, whether April or Jim or I get our questions answered and we get FaceTime with the principals. It's a matter of getting information for the American people so that the public can hold their leaders accountable and know what the president's actually doing.
Doug Brinkley, Jim Acosta, April Ryan, Phil Rucker, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just ahead, we're going to have the latest tally in the fight for the House seat in Georgia, where they're spending $150 to $250 per vote. The candidates have a lot more riding on it than just money. We've been watching this race all night. New vote totals coming in from Georgia's 6th district, where more than $50 million has been spent in pursuit of the seat vacated by President Trump's Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. Republican Karen Handel has now pulled out ahead. For the latest, let's go to John Kings. John?
And Anderson, as you can see, the Georgia's 6th congressional district, red on the map. Let's stretch it out a little bit. As you just noted, the Republican candidate, Karen Handel, now with a 6-point lead, 53% to 47%. Pretty healthy lead. We're at about 2/3 of the expected vote counted. So still some votes to count from today, but roughly about 2/3 of the anticipated vote has been counted, 53 to 47. Republicans will feel good about that, although we are not to the finish line yet. Let me break down the district for you, as we've been doing throughout the night. Pop this out a little bit, and just to keep reminding you, this part above this green line is the district. So you're getting votes from Fulton County, which includes Atlanta, but only the voters up here in this part of the district actually cast ballots today. Same for Cobb County and DeKalb County. So what's happening in this race right now? We've said this throughout the night. The most important part of the district, Cobb County for Karen Handel. She needs to run it up big. She is doing just that, 61% to 39%. In the most Republican area of the district, the Republican is winning, and winning big. The most Democratic area, over here in DeKalb, essentially mirror image, right? John Ossoff doing what he needs to do there, running it up by a big, healthy margin there. The key to this race is the most populous part of the district, which is this northern part of Fulton County. 53-47 in Fulton County. That essentially mirrors what's happening in the rest of the race. So as we've counted more votes, Karen Handel has stretched her lead from the early vote in this part of Fulton County, the northern, most populous part of the district. That is why, Anderson, again, we're about 2/3 of the vote counted, and the Republican candidate has a lead. We're going to count the rest of the votes, but the results here tonight are going to start a very, very big national conversation. And at the moment, Republicans, especially because they think they did pretty well today, turning out votes on Election Day, at the moment, Republicans are getting more optimistic here.
Yeah, John King, John, thanks. We'll check in with you again. Back with the panel, David Chalian, Gloria Borger, Mark Preston, and Dana Bash. David, what do you make of how these numbers are looking so far?
Well, when John was just going county by county, I thought it was interesting. Cobb County, which John was saying is the Republican stronghold, Karen Handel's actually overperforming there. Remember, back in April, you saw 11 Republican candidates, combine them together, and she's overperforming the percentage that all the Republicans got in that Republican stronghold back in April. That is a good sign for Karen Handel. She really is running up the score where she needs to, and I think you're going to start seeing a conversation take place here among Democrats if indeed they fall short here. Again, a district that is not home turf to them, but they put everything into it. And if they fall short, we're going to start moving into a conversation about belly aching in the Democratic Party about what went wrong here and how to run in the Trump era, because they clearly, if they fall short here, have not figured that out yet.
Yeah, Gloria, I mean, if Democrats do fall short, if Republicans win, what does that conversation look like for Democrats?
Well, it's not going to be pretty, because there are going to be some Democrats who say that Ossoff shouldn't have run to the center the way he did in this race. He was clearly an anti-Trump candidate, but he didn't run against Trump head on because he knows this district. It's a Republican seat, so he ran a more moderate race. So there are going to be Democrats who are saying, you would have won if you had just taken on the president more frontally. And then there are going to be other Democrats who say, look, This guy did as well as anybody could possibly do, given the fact that this is a solid Republican seat, which has been won by 20 to 25-point margins for decades. And so what the Democrats need to do, and if they lose here, they're going to have to try and figure out what the best way to run against Donald Trump is. And I think the answer is going to be you have to take it district by district. And in this district, they're going to have to kind of take apart their strategy. Republicans had a really good strategy here. They looked at the voters, that the Republican voters, there were 36,000 of them that didn't vote in the primary, but they were high propensity Republican voters, and they targeted them, and they got those people out to vote. So the Democrats also have to look at the mechanics here.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, I don't think you can say that talking about Democrats not running against President Trump, I mean, certainly Hillary Clinton, one of the knocks on her was that was her whole focus. Just, I'm not Donald Trump, and going after Donald Trump, when that certainly didn't work.
No, that's exactly right. And obviously this was and has been a race about the president. That's certainly what the Democrats have tried to make it about, but also about very important issues to voters like health care. And if you look at the polls, that's what the people who said that they were going to the polls cared most about. But, I think that the idea that this is a Republican district historically since Jimmy Carter, and why was it competitive in the first place? And of course it should go Republican if it goes that way. You can make that argument. However, this might have been a Republican district, but not historically a Trump district, in that Mitt Romney won by double digits. Donald Trump won this district by, I think, like 1 percentage point or a little bit more than that. So to David's point earlier about Democrats and Gloria about looking inward and trying to figure out how to run in the Trump era, this was supposed to be the district that they could have done that, because it is wealthy, it is educated, and the kind of voters who are in this district were supposed to be the kind that Democrats could pick off from the Republican. If the Republican ends up winning, it throws the whole Democratic strategy into kind of up in the air, and they kind of have to figure it out all over again.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll have more with all of you. Thanks very much. Up next, billionaire Michael Bloomberg was a critic of candidate Donald Trump, but considering that Bloomberg has produced a new documentary on climate change, his views of President Trump may surprise you. Votes continue to come in from Georgia's special House election. Republican Karen Handel now pulling out ahead of Democrat Jon Ossoff. Breonna Keeler is at Ossoff election night headquarters. Kaylee Hartung is at Handel headquarters. Let's start with Breonna. What's the scene there?
Hi there, Anderson. Well, people here, I think, are a little nervous than they have been. They're waiting for Jon Ossoff to come on stage. His fiance was just up talking to them. But I've been talking to sources, and there's certainly a lot of nerves coming from Democrats. They're still holding out some hope that some vote by mail, some of that early vote that was sent in by some voters, could come in and be positive for Jon Ossoff. However, it is looking like he's the one who has ground to make up in the vote totals. And Republicans that I've been talking to, Anderson, say that Karen Handel is outperforming the voter models that they have constructed to see if she can have a win. So right now they're still waiting, but a lot of people, they say even if Ossoff loses, they feel that there's something happening here, and it's an indication that maybe votes on the left might matter more than they did even back in November.
Interesting. Breonna Keeler, thanks. Let's go next to Kaylee Hartung at Handel headquarters. More optimism there, Kaylee?
Yeah, well, Anderson, as those latest numbers for Karen Handel were announced in this room, Jerry Wood, the longtime mayor of Roswell, Georgia, one of the largest cities in the state in Fulton County, the mayor got up on stage and declared, "We're going to win." The crowd here went wild, but I was standing next to a GOP state party official who was more cautious in his assessment of the information we have to this point. He said what we wanted to happen and what we predicted to happen to this point is happening. You've got Ossoff heavily favored in DeKalb County and Cobb County turning in strong for Handel. but this is all going to come down to Fulton County. This is what the Handel campaign expected. It's the largest county of the three. They expect those results to be the last to come in. So a period of darkness, if you will. Now, Anderson, all eyes on Fulton County later tonight.
All right, Kelly, thanks very much. Now to the outspoken New York billionaire who didn't end up running for president in the last election, though he came very close. Mayor Michael Bloomberg served as mayor of New York for 12 years. Instead, just kept it being CEO of Bloomberg and a philanthropist, including producing a new documentary about climate change called From the Ashes. I spoke to him earlier about the billionaire who did run and won, who Bloomberg has said stands a 55% chance in his estimate of being reelected. He also took issue with President Trump's environmental policies. Your new documentary, From the Ashes, I want to talk to you about coal. How much of the problem of climate change is linked to coal?
Well, a very big percentage. Coal is far and away the worst fuel you can burn, and it is the fuel that's predominantly used around the world to generate electricity and in many cases to heat as well. India and China, enormous dependence on coal, which they are, thank God, starting to understand and trying to get off, although it'd be much more difficult for them. America, it used to be 80, 90% was dependent on coal, then it got down to 50. Today it's a small percentage, and the number of people working in the coal business has declined, while in fact the demand has gone up because there's still meteorological coal, and there's still lots of coal that we export and that sort of thing. But the coal industry, at the same time, we've had this effect on people using less coal, which has been much more modern for the last 2 to 3 generations. It has we've automated the coal industry. That's what's brought down the coal miners' jobs.
When President Trump talked during the campaign, even now, about putting coal miners back to work, is he selling them a bill of goods?
I don't want to characterize anything the president said. Let me say there is nothing that is going to save coal miners' jobs. They will continue to decline as technology gets better and, incidentally, as we use less coal, but it's mainly the technology that's doing it. And to put it in context, there are more people that work at Arby's than work in the coal business. So there are lots of people, and even in New York, you look at stores that are closed because of Amazon and people being able to rent clothing and things like that. Coal miners are a case where we have to help them, and in fact, the president's budget took away funding from a few of these organizations that are trying to train coal miners in new careers. And Bloomberg Philanthropies, I'm happy to say, has stepped in, and we're trying to support them. We've got to do something for the coal miners, but we've got to do something for people in lots of industries where technology is killing their jobs.
Does it matter if the President of the United States won't go on record saying whether or not climate change is real?
Well, it isn't hopeful. I think it's just embarrassing because virtually every scientist with peer review says the same thing.
In the past, he said it was a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese.
You know, look, I'm not here to criticize the president. Is it helpful that America pulls out and the president says these things? No, it is not helpful. Is it a disaster for the world? No. It just makes us look foolish. No reputable person or scientist doubts that we are creating an environmental and a climate change problem. You can have arguments about whether in 2030, 2040, 2050, it will start heating up, whether we can get to a point where it's so hot you can't stop it from getting hotter. That's a theoretical possibility. Nobody knows.
Is there any chance of you running for president?
Well,
I mean, you seriously looked into it.
I have said that I might run for the president of my block association. No, there's no secret that I thought about it. I think there are enormous problems. It would be an honor if people thought I could do something about them, and I'd love to have the opportunity to try.
But you were willing to really invest in a run. I mean, I read as much as $1 billion.
We had commercials made. We have lawyers on staff to get on the ballot. We did lots and lots of polling. And what we really found out in the end is that an independent cannot win.
Where do you see Democrats now? I mean, I think you gave...
Oh, they're being pulled to the left. You saw Hillary being pulled to the left.
Do they have a message, actually, for 2020?
Well, I don't know. I've thought that Hillary never really... I think she would have been a decent president. I said when I talked to the DNC that I had many disagreements with her, and I'm not here to endorse her. Let me just say I didn't vote for Donald Trump, who's a very nice guy, but I didn't think is the right person to be president of the United States for a variety of reasons, which I talked about then. But Hillary never got a real message out. And Donald Trump, I always thought one of the reasons
Never
he
got a real
elected,
message beyond don't vote for that guy.
it was don't vote for that guy and the gender issue. Whereas Donald had a saying, make America great again. I don't know what again means, but America, that's patriotic. And great, that's a good word. And I thought it's not quite that simple, but we do live in a world of 140 characters, and slogans matter. And it just, you don't think that that's what your decision's based on, but it predisposes you to really want to do something. And I never understood, given most of the media is Democratic, why Hillary couldn't find somebody to give her a good tagline. That's what she should have done, I always thought.
I think recently you gave the chance that President Trump would be reelected 55%.
Yeah, sure, because,
do you think it's still about that?
Well, the incumbent always has an advantage. It depends what the world is like in 3.5 years. If the economy is good, he had roughly 50% of the public vote, little less, but in the right place, so he got elected because of the Electoral College, but he had roughly half the people wanted him to be president. And if it turns out that he's okay, some of the half that voted against him because they thought he'd be a disaster probably wouldn't think that anymore, so that would help him. Incumbents always have an advantage. And the Democratic Party is going to be torn apart by the left and the centralists. Now, the Republican Party is also being torn apart between the centralists and the hard right, but they've rented a candidate, the candidate has rented a party, and they will probably, without much of a fuss, get behind Donald Trump, I would assume, assuming he runs for re-election.
All the investigations going on by Capitol Hill, by the special counsel, do you believe there's any there?
I don't know whether there's there, but if there's an allegation, you have to have a competent, independent investigation that will either find something wrong or remove the cloud. It is very difficult to govern when there's a cloud around you. Having said that, the president just has to get it out of his mind, stop tweeting, and focusing on running the government and let the investigation go on, because without that, he'll always have this problem. And if he could get rid of it, and he says there's nothing to it, so I take him at his word, but he's got to prove that there's nothing there. You can't just say there's nothing there.
Do you follow him on Twitter?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Mayor Bloomberg, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with the latest results from Georgia's House race. We are out of time. Time to hand things over to Don Lemon for the latest on Georgia's special election and much more. CNN Tonight starts right now.
Thank you very much, Anderson Cooper. We've got some breaking news to tell you about right now. Results are coming in the most expensive House race in history. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. CNN projects right now, Karen Handel is the winner in the Georgia congressional race down in the 6th district in Georgia. CNN's David Chalian joins us now with analysis. Right off the top at 10 o'clock, David Chalian, Karen Handel is the winner in Georgia, the Republican.
That's a huge projection that we just made, Don. This is a big victory for Republicans. I know it is in a Republican district. This really, in other years, would not have been a competitive district, but Democrats went all in on this. They raised a ton of money, significantly outspent Republicans. This was the best shot Democrats had in these special elections to really try to make a victory in the Trump era, and they came up short, which now, of course, is going to create a whole series of questions about how the Democratic Party should run in the era of Donald Trump, because they came up short here.
What's interesting is that breaking news, a Republican wins in Georgia. It shouldn't be breaking news. This is the way it should happen. But the fact, David, that it was so close, at least it appeared in the polling, and then the results as well. The results are actually really close. What does this say about the state of affairs, especially the Trump? Is there a mandate for Donald Trump? Will he keep his support? Will it stay the same? Are Democrats looking at this as necessarily a loss, or they got close and maybe there's hope for them in the midterms?
Well, I don't think there are moral victories here. I mean, I think that the Democrats lost this race. That is a loss. They went all in on it. And with all the energized base that they had, the small dollar donations, yes, they were running in a district whose DNA is a Republican district, so it was an uphill battle all along, but they lost. So I don't think we should gloss over that. What I hear you saying, though, Don, you are right. It is important to note Donald Trump is still at 36% approval nationwide. Obviously, this one district in Georgia isn't going to change that. But what this does do, Don, All the Republicans that have been nervous this spring about Trump's numbers and is he going to be a big drag on the Republican Party in November 2018, that still may come to be. We have no idea what the political landscape will look like a year and a half from now. But in the immediate term, Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan just got very good news with this victory. It will calm some of the GOP waters in Congress as they are trying to get health care through and tax reform through. Had the results been the other way, you might have seen Republicans really panicking, sort of fleeing the party to look out for themselves. Now, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, and Donald Trump have a case to make to Republicans that though his numbers are low, it is not taking the party down yet electorally.
All right. Thank you, David Challen. David, I want you to stand by because we're going to need your help to get through the next couple of hours here on CNN. If you're just joining us, Karen Handel, there was a very close race down in Georgia in the 6th Congressional District. Karen Handel, the Republican, CNN is projecting Karen Handel the winner, of course, going against Jon Ossoff, the Democrat. I want to get to the magic wall now. Before we get to our reporters who are at both headquarters, magic wall now, CNN's John King. John, take us through the numbers here. What happened?
Don, let's take a look. You mentioned this is Georgia's 6th Congressional District. It's in the Atlanta suburbs. 52-48 is the vote count as we speak, but we've called this race for the Republican Karen Handel a major disappointment for the Democrats. This is the district, when you look at the entirety of it. I want to show you now the district by counties, and as I stretch this out, I just want to draw a line. The district is in the northern part of these counties here, the northern part of Fulton County, which also contains Atlanta, but Atlanta is south of the district, Cobb County, and DeKalb County. 3 counties make up this district. Let's show you what happened tonight, why Karen Handel is the winner. Number 1, start with the blue. Jon Ossoff did about what he needed to do in DeKalb County, which is the most Democratic area of the district. He needed to run it up here, 58-42 at the current vote count. That's about what he needed to do. Here is the giant problem for Jon Ossoff, starting here in Cobb County. This is the number Democrats will look at. Both parties in this race said for Jon Ossoff to win this race tonight, he needed to be around 43% in the most Republican area of the district. That is Cobb County. He's below 40%. That right there is game over if you talk to the race. And then move over here. The most populous part of the district is Fulton County. And again, Jon Ossoff, I'll take that yellow away for you here, but Jon Ossoff, again, is not only below 50%, but to win the district, Jon Ossoff had to be about 43% or so in Cobb County, and he had to keep this closer. Fulton County, this is where most of the voters are in the district, the biggest chunk anyway. He had to keep it closer. 51-49, 52-48 maybe, 53-47 again. Karen Handel wins this district. What does that tell you? Let's get back to what David Challen was just talking about. Number 1, Republicans will celebrate. Number 2, just like in the final days of 2016, when the fire alarm was sounded, Republicans proved they could turn out their vote better on the mechanics than the Democrats in a highly competitive race. Number 3, back to David Challen's point, one of the things that would have happened if Jon Ossoff won this race, if you were a Republican, maybe getting tired of being in the House, maybe not in love with your Republican President Donald Trump, a lot of Republicans were thinking if the climate's going to be horrible, maybe we'll retire. This Republican victory tonight likely to stem at least some of the Republican retirement talk in the House of Representatives. Number 2, this is going to make it harder for Democrats to recruit candidates in other Republican districts. The Democrats wanted this win tonight to go to mayors, state legislators, prominent Democrats in other Republican districts around the country and say, see, we can do this in 2018. We need you to run. A lot of those Democrats now, Don, a lot of people will say, how can you take one district and give these national implications? It's the way politicians do it. It's the way their consultants do it. It's the way their egos work. A lot of Democrats in other places in the country are going to see a loss here after all that money going in and say, maybe not.
I want to say something because some of the analysts, John, were saying it's going to be really tight. And as I was speaking to Republicans who are down in Georgia, they're saying one of them said to me, as a matter of fact, who knows politics down, they said, Jon Ossoff is in a dream. We'll prove tonight that Karen Handel will win. Democrats should have taken the $40 million to fix their failing DNC party instead of throwing it all away on a 30-year-old man who doesn't even live in the district. How do you respond to that, John King?
Well, it's an interesting question. And look, both parties are going to spin this. Both parties will overreact to one House district. But here's a couple of things we know to be true. Donald Trump picked 4 Republican House members to join his cabinet. At the close of business tonight, Republicans will have held all 4 of those seats. Now, only this one in Georgia was viewed as competitive. But Democrats did make a play in Montana. They tried in Kansas. They didn't really try in the South Carolina district that was on the ballot tonight. That one was closer than people thought. All of these races won by Republicans, all by margins Democrats can say were closer than 2016, closer than 2012, closer than last time. But close doesn't count. Democrats can say, yes, the climate is better for us, but they're still not winning. Number one, back to your other point about this race, though, here's a very interesting thing. if you're thinking about 2016, Donald Trump won. He was the outsider. He ran against the Republican establishment before he ran against Hillary Clinton and the Democratic establishment. He was the fresh face. He was the non-politician. Well, a lot of Democrats thought that was Jon Ossoff, right? 30 years old, not in politics, be the Trump in the race,
John
be the
King,
outsider.
Karen Handel
said, I'm sorry, Don. Carol Handel said, I have experience.
Yeah.
She won.
She's coming up to the podium now. John, we'll get back to you. Let's go to Handel headquarters down in Atlanta.
More things and do that. Now, all of you know that I am a person who likes to always dot every I and cross every T. So let's just make sure we do that, and I'll be back down in just a very short time. Thank y'all for everything.
So what it sounds like, Carter there in the end, do we still have John with us?
I'm here, Don.
It sounds like, John, she didn't want to declare just yet. She said she wanted to dot the I's and cross the T's, which is smart of her, but we're projecting her the winner. Is that what you got from that?
Yeah, exactly that. She's come down a couple of times to keep her supporters in the game with the very early vote, saying everything looks good so far. She's the conservative candidate, and she's being conservative tonight at the end of this election. Look, here's what's going on. There are still some more votes to be counted. What the Democrats are saying is that they don't want to concede until they know more about the mail ballots, mail-in early votes that cast by mail, absentee ballots and the like. Can Jon Ossoff possibly come back? I have been in email communication with both Republicans and Democrats on the ground who know this race a lot better than I do, who have been on the ground in the last few days. They both, Democrats and Republicans, say no way. But if you're Karen Handel, if you've been through this before, she's lost a couple of primaries before in other races, so she's just being extra careful. But we're very confident in our projection, and she'll be back down in that ballroom saying, thank you, I win. Pretty
All
soon,
right,
Don.
John King, I want you to stand by. David Chalian standing by. They're helping us out with the numbers and the analysis here. Why don't we get, though, to Karen Handel's headquarters. Our correspondent there is Kaylee Hartung, and she joins us. Kaylee, they must be thrilled that they have pulled this out. But again, Karen Handel coming to the podium and said, stand by. We just want to make sure. Take us behind the scenes there. What's happening?
Yeah, Don, well, the two television screens that are in this ballroom are both on Fox News. Fox News has not yet declared Karen Handel the winner here, so this crowd not reacting to the news that we've shared on our airwaves. So Karen Handel and the state Republican Party not yet comfortable declaring her the winner. And this all goes back to a thought process they had coming into this night. They knew that DeKalb County would go heavy for Jon Ossoff. They knew Cobb County would be where their strongest numbers would be, but they thought all along that this race would come down to the numbers out of Fulton County. Fulton County being the largest of these three and known to be the last in this district to get their results in because they're dealing with such a high volume of voters in that area. So Karen Handel being cautious, but the crowd here booing at this moment as they watch what's on the screen. But otherwise, the crowd here very upbeat and really anticipating a big celebration at the end of this night when all those I's are dotted and T's crossed.
All right. Thank you, Katie Hartung. Katie Hartung at Karen Handel headquarters. Is just unusual because we've just declared her, projected her to be the winner, and they're booing. They should be very happy. I want to get to CNN's Brianna Keeler. She's live at the Democrat Jon Ossoff's headquarters. I'm sure the mood is not quite the same where you are, Brianna.
No, and then part of that is because the televisions have been here on CNN, so the folks here are aware of the call and they're disappointed. But I will tell you, Don, having been to parties where you've seen people and their candidates have lost, they've been a lot more disappointed, and the music is still going here. They're waiting to hear from Jon Ossoff, but it was pretty clear from the beginning of the night when some of those early votes were coming in that the Democrats close to this race were uncomfortable. Republicans were feeling very good. Now, the one thing I will say, though, Don, it's talking to Republicans who even certainly were very supportive of Karen Handel. They do warn. They look back, for instance, on 2009, and they say that they were feeling really discouraged by having lost special elections, and then they got into 2010 where they actually won the House back. So they say this is a great night for them, obviously, but they warn too much about extrapolating too much from the bigger picture, especially when you have a race like this where tens of millions of dollars have come in, and people on the right and the left argue that it really changes the landscape of the race. But talking to Democrats, they're saying this is a race where John Ossoff never should have had any business being competitive, and they're hopeful that that's something that will encourage Democrats, especially in races that could be more competitive than this one.
All right, Brianna Keilar, I want you to stand by. I want to bring in now Mark Preston, Gloria Borger, Dana Bash, David Axelrod, and Kevin Madden. Good evening to all of you. Here we go. So, Dana, you first. Wasn't supposed to be a swing district, right? I mean, that's what Brianna just said. This seat in the northern Atlanta suburbs has been held by a Republican for nearly 40 years.
That's absolutely right. Newt Gingrich held it, and most recently, Tom Price, who vacated the seat because he is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And with him, he was a popular guy in the district, well known. He won by 20-plus points. Just in November, 30-plus points 2 years before that. So this has been a traditionally Republican district. However, Don, it hasn't necessarily been a Trump kind of district, which is one of the reasons Democrats put so much time, money, and effort into this race. And when I say not a sort of a traditionally Trump district, what I mean by that is it is highly, highly wealthy, a lot of college-educated plus voters there, the kind of voters that Democrats were hoping would be turned off by a Donald Trump presidency, that weren't necessarily all in for the kind of Trump Republican nomination that they saw, never mind winning the White House. And, you know, we're going to analyze where the votes came from, exactly how this went down, but the bottom line is they were wrong. And so this is going to be a huge morale buster for Democrats who were hoping that all of the fervor that they have been seeing out there, the grassroots, the marching, you name it, that they have been trying to figure out how to harness and turn into actual votes at the polls. Whatever they did here, for whatever reason, this wasn't the answer. And they haven't figured out how to win against a Republican in the Trump era. Even though this has been a Republican district, he only won by about 1% in this district in 2016.
Gloria, whatever it is, whatever the analysis is, we certainly do know that they spent a lot of money down there, the most expensive House race ever.
Ever. Estimates are over $40 million for this single race. And most of the money came from out of the district. I mean, there was one estimate that for every penny that came from inside the district spent on this race, there were $10 that came from outside the district. So you can imagine that. Look, this was a race that Democrats thought they could win. It was the kind of district, affluent, some minority, higher educated, that they thought they could take a candidate and run against Donald Trump. But what the Republicans did, and I've been communicating with a consultant who worked on this race tonight, what the Republicans did was they had Karen Handel run against John Ossoff as a liberal and a Pelosi Democrat, and not focus as much on Donald Trump. I mean, he was about 45% popularity in the district, although we're not sure about that, which is higher than the national level.
So she didn't focus on Donald Trump, and neither did he, right?
Right. Well, and neither did he. He focused on health care. He focused on the issues. And she wasn't hugging Donald Trump that hard. She was just saying, look, this is just another liberal. And they tried to get Republicans to put their shirts back on. There were 36,000 of them, we're told, who sort of didn't vote in the primary, and they tried to get those, they targeted those people and said, come back and vote in this election because we need you, and they did.
Interesting. What do you make of that, David Axelrod? She didn't hug Donald Trump. He didn't really mention him as well. But yet they thought this would, at least nationally, that it would be some sort of referendum on the Trump administration, depending on which way this race went.
Well, there's no doubt that if Democrats had won this district, it would have been an earthquake on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue. The White House would have been reeling and been faced with questions whether Trump was mentioned a lot or not down there, about whether this was a referendum on him. And on the Hill, as John King mentioned, people would be very, very nervous. You'd see incumbents more serious about retiring. And you'd see less of an appetite for supporting some of the Trump priorities and standing up for Trump in the Congress. So they avoided that disaster. but it wasn't a stellar showing for Republicans. And as was mentioned, a district they've held for nearly 40 years. Look, but Democrats, you know, this isn't horseshoes. You don't get anything for coming close. The question is, are there any augurings here? This was a district, unlike some of the others, where that we've seen so far, where you'd expect Democrats to do a little bit better because, as Dana mentioned, twice as many voters here are college-educated voters, anti-Trump voters. But as you point out, this really wasn't a race about Trump. And the Republicans ran a very smart race. They kept it away from Trump, made it a classic kind of liberal versus conservative race. And they did motivate their voters. I think one of the things that Democrats were hoping for was a slightly lower turnout today. And there were far more voters participated today than they anticipated. They were counting on this vote by mail program of theirs to overcome the election day margin of Republicans, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I have a couple of responses here that I want to get. Maybe the president's son, but first, I think it's more important the House Speaker. His son doesn't speak for him. The House Speaker, Paul Ryan, this is for you, Mark Preston. Paul Ryan says, congratulations to Karen Handel on a hard-earned and well-deserved victory. Democrats from coast to coast threw everything they had at this race, and Karen would not be defeated. And then he goes on to talk about how important this is and how important this fight is. What do you make of the response from the House Speaker, Mark Preston?
Well, I mean, it's predictable, and Karen Handel should be lauded for running a very good campaign. And he's right that Democrats did try to throw everything in this race, including millions and millions and millions of dollars, most, if not all of it, from out of the state of Georgia. You know, just so people have an understanding about when we talk about this being not Trump country, but conservative. And Don, you would know this having lived in Atlanta. I lived there for 3 years. I was a newspaper reporter in that district. This is Old South meets New South. These are social conservatives, that in this whole area, specifically up in Cobb County and northern Fulton County, that saw an influx of Northerners come in the 1990s during the Olympics. These were not necessarily liberals, but they weren't necessarily hardcore social conservatives. They were fiscal conservatives. So when you look at that time in the buildup of this district, and we saw industry moving down there as well, is that those aren't necessarily Trump voters, and that's why Democrats thought they had a shot at it. But the bottom line is that that is a Republican area. Democrats were hoping to pick one off, and by picking one off, they would hope then to try to boost the morale, to try to recruit candidates across the country. I don't think this is necessarily going to depress that, but it's not necessarily going to spark an outcry of people trying to run against Republicans in the next, 24 hours or so.
Kevin Madden, yeah, go on. Who's that? Is that Kevin?
That's David.
Go ahead,
I just want to make one point that needs to be made, which is that there are 23 suburban districts, somewhat like this one, that Hillary Clinton carried, and that's where Democrats are going to be focusing in 2018. This was not a pure test of their ability to make gains in those districts, as these districts tend to follow their presidential vote. And so Democrats are still going to look at those districts and say, we've got a fighting chance there, especially since we've reduced the margin in many of these races in Republican districts in this special election season.
Well, that sets me up perfectly for Kevin Madden. Kevin, having been there, and as you know, even with most elections, Republicans and Democrats usually come home to how they've always voted. And I thought, and maybe I guess I've proven right, but I thought that unless Jon Ossoff had a huge lead, that Republicans would eventually come home in this district and Karen Handel would pull it off.
Well, yeah, I think, but also I think the key to victory here was that Republicans were not complacent. I think they're very highly cognizant of the tough environment that they have. I think they do know that the president can be a challenge in particular districts like this. As Dana Bash has pointed out, this was not necessarily a Trump district. So understanding that they had some of these challenges, what did they do? And I think that first of all, as David Axelrod pointed out, they were very aggressive in defining Jon Ossoff as out of step with the district. They made sure that every voter knew that he didn't actually live in the district and couldn't vote there. Yeah. They went out and raised a ton of money to make sure that they defined him very early and often. And then they also aligned him with with Nancy Pelosi. And Nancy Pelosi is still a drag on some of these districts. And one of the other things that the Democrats Democrats have failed to do is they haven't really found a workable message that they can unify not only the Democratic base around, but some more moderate Democrats. And they haven't been able to get a lot of these grumpy Republicans that may not be so thrilled with President Trump, but don't see elections like this as a referendum on them. And instead, they come home to support a traditional Republican candidate
And they
who
have
is
history
aligned
on their
with the district,
side,
likes
Kevin.
Karen Handel.
They have history on their side. They have, for
That's
the last,
right.
it's been 40 years that they've carried this district.
Yeah, but I think the question is, would they be complacent and think that the district's natural tendencies are going to help them win the day? No. Knowing that there's this tremendous amount of outside money coming in, they raised the money and they fought. And quite frankly, to Mark's point, the MVP of this campaign would have to be Paul Ryan and his Congressional Leadership Fund. Those outside groups that knew that this was going to be a battle of resources just as much as it was going to be a battle of ideas came in and helped fill that void.
That's why I wanted to read the House Speaker's response. Stand by, everyone. We have a lot to talk about tonight. Our breaking news tonight, CNN projecting Republican Karen Handel winning the special election in the 6th District down in Georgia. We'll be right back. Straight to John Ossoff headquarters down in Atlanta. Let's listen in.
For people here in Georgia, for people across the country, and for people around the world. This small community in Georgia, which has become the epicenter of politics, sometimes to my chagrin, for months now. And it's had nothing to do with me. It never has. It's about you. It's about an extraordinary community at an extraordinary moment in history. The first opportunity in this country to make a statement about values that can still unite people. At a time when politics has been dominated by fear and hatred and scapegoating and division, this community stood up. Women in this community stood up. You did. And you picked this campaign up, and you picked me up, and you picked Alicia up, and you carried us on your shoulders. And we showed the world that in places where no one thought it was even possible to fight, we could fight. We showed them what courage and kindness and humility are capable of. We showed them that we can still build coalitions of people who may not see eye to eye on everything, but rather than demonizing each other, we find common ground to move forward. And that's the only way this country will move forward. So this is not the outcome any of us were hoping for. But this is the beginning of something much bigger than us. So thank you. Thank you for the most extraordinary experience I've ever had the honor of being a part of. Thank you for knocking on hundreds of thousands of doors. Thank you for making hundreds of thousands of phone calls. It's extraordinary what you have done here. The fight goes on. Hope is still alive. I thank you all so much. I thank you. I thank my family. And most of all, I want to thank Alicia. Who's been on the campaign trail for months after working long hours every day in the operating room, who has lifted me up every evening after long days and shown what true partnership is. So thank you, Alicia. Thank you, everybody.
John Ossoff down in Atlanta giving his concession speech. Of course, CNN projecting him the winner, and he's coming out conceding to Karen Handel. His concessions, he lost. And so he conceded to Karen Handel, who's a Republican candidate. I want to bring in now CNN's David Chalian. David, they thought they had a chance, but he fell short in the end.
He did indeed, and it's so interesting listening to his words there, Don, because as you know, in the closing days of the campaign, in the closing weeks of the campaign, he really didn't want to make this about Donald Trump. He was really trying to talk about the economy, getting jobs in the district, high-tech jobs. He was really trying to play to the district, knowing that it is a Republican district, even one that is tricky for Donald Trump. He only won it by 1 point last year. But in his concession speech, as he's leaving the stage, he brought back the themes without mentioning Donald Trump by name, but talking about our politics of hatred and division, and clearly trying to say that this was the beginning of a response to that kind of politics. One would assume he means the politics that he believes Donald Trump exemplifies. It's interesting that now that the race is over, he was sort of getting back into that kind of messaging.
And the groups that he did well, he specifically wanted to, when you said he talked about the messages that were carried through the campaign, but he also wanted to speak specifically to women. I guess he carried a high number of women in suburban, especially suburban women.
Yeah, well, it's a suburban district, and we don't have exit polls to sort of look at the exact breakdown, but women were a huge part of his coalition, talking to folks on both sides of the aisle about this race, even though he was running against, obviously, a female candidate who won here. Women are part of the Democratic base overall, and in this district, that was definitely one of his targets to get out, so he certainly wanted to give a shout-out to that group of voters.
David, I need you to stand by because I want to bring in John King, live for us now at the Magic Wall. John, you heard John Ossoff's speech there, and you heard David and I talking about the groups that made up the folks who voted for him, and he did pretty well. He didn't pull it off in the end, though. What do you have? What's the latest?
Now, and on the conversation that's going to happen again, 4 Republican seats, 4 Republican members of Congress joined the Trump cabinet. The Republicans have held now all 4 of these seats, including GA-6, which was viewed as the most competitive. Close doesn't count. Are there things Democrats can find in every one of those races to say, hey, here's some hope for 2018? Hey, here's some lessons we can learn? Sure. But did they get any wins? No. And did they get a win in the place they targeted the most, spent all the money? Absolutely not. This is tough. This is district-wide here, the Atlanta suburbs, 52 to 48 at the count now. We're getting close to the... We're counting now, we're up to 160 plus of the precincts in this district. I want to pull it out for you this way and show you what happened here. First, I'm sorry for 1 second, I want to go back to here and draw you a line just to give you a sense. The congressional district is actually north of this line. The counties report the votes, so you see colored in areas that are not in the congressional district because the counties report these votes. But let's look at what happened here. Number one, here's a painful thing for Democrats. To take back the House next year, Democrats have to win 24 seats. So you have to take away 24 Republican seats, which means you have to go to places where Republican wins and convince Republicans to switch and vote for Democrats. Cobb County is the most conservative, the most Republican part of this district. John Ossoff got only 39% of the vote. There's more votes to be counted, Don, but he's at roughly 39%. He needed to be around 43, 44 to have a chance in this part of the district to win the district. Democrats have to ask themselves, how do we get Republicans to vote, especially in a district where Donald Trump performed so poorly, just barely won it. Why is it that John Ossoff couldn't get Republican crossover votes? They're going to have to ask that. In the most Democratic part of the district, and the reason we know this race is over, even though we haven't counted all the votes, DeKalb County is the most Democratic part. All the votes in DeKalb are counted. John Ossoff did quite well in that county, nearly 60-40, 58 to 42, but there are no more votes there for him to come back. That's why we know, even as we count the final votes, that Karen Handel will win this race. In Fulton County, again, the northern part of Fulton County, the Atlanta suburbs out to the exurbs, 53-47. Strong performance by the Republican candidate, Karen Handel. Out of 2008, after 2012, a lot of talk that Republicans didn't get the mechanics of the digital age of politics. Donald Trump's campaign proved it late Republicans proved it late in 2016, and Republicans have now proven it again in a competitive area with a lot of money. They can turn out their voters on Election Day and compete in the early voting. That's a painful lesson for Democrats, Don, as we move from these special elections now into the 2018 climate. And I just want to make the button up with what I said before. If you're Republicans, you were afraid if you lost tonight, a lot of incumbents would retire. I'm not saying incumbents won't retire. Incumbents always retire. But the number of Republican incumbents retiring is likely to be impacted by this tonight. That's one of the reasons Republicans are very, very happy with this win.
John King for us at the Magic Wall. John, I want you to stand by as well because I'm going to bring in now Larry Sabato, the director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. Larry, welcome to the program. The bigger picture in Georgia, what is the bigger picture in this race? What can you tell us about what the voters were looking for here?
Well, the bigger picture to me is that the 2018 congressional elections are a year and a half away, and a million things can happen that can change the picture. But for Democrats, obviously, it's pretty depressing. That's the word I've seen on Twitter more than any other from Democrats about the result. I think if Democrats learn a lesson from this election, it's that the euphoria that they felt for the last several months as Donald Trump has fallen in the polls, and they began to believe that this would be not easy, but doable to take over the House of Representatives and eventually replace Donald Trump. That euphoria is gone, and it's replaced with reality. And the reality is it's going to be a long twilight struggle, day in and day out, if they're going to be able to retake the House and eventually defeat Donald Trump. It won't be easy. It may not be possible, but it certainly won't be easy.
I want to ask you this because as you mentioned that, this is from Massachusetts 6th District, and you probably know him as Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton. He says, hashtag Ossoff. A race better be a wake-up call for Democrats. Business as usual isn't working. Time to stop rehashing 2016 and talk about the future. He added, we need a genuinely new message, a serious jobs plan that reaches all Americans, and a bigger tent, not a smaller one. Focus on the future. What do you think of that, Larry?
Well, clearly, Democrats didn't do that in 2016. It's one of the reasons why they lost non-college blue-collar workers and therefore lost Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. But that's one side of it. The other side of it is to recognize the reality in this incredibly polarized era. Donald Trump has polarized things even further, if that were possible. When that happens, in the end, the vast majority of voters return to their party. They do it sooner or later. And
I got to get to Karen Handel. She is down there and she is about to give her victory speech. Thank you, Larry.
I have to start, first of all, by saying thank you. There are literally hundreds of people to thank and scores of elected officials and GOP leaders who put their confidence in me right from the very beginning, and I'll probably miss a few, but there were several who stepped up right from day one, including my very good friend Bob Ott, Joanne Burrow, Terry Null, Joe Gebbia and Bates Madison, Joe Lockwood, my hometown mayor Jerry Wood. And I need to thank, on April 18th, I said to everyone that this was going to be a very, very tight race. It was going to be contentious, and it was going to require all hands on deck. And that's exactly what we had. From all of the others who were the GOP competitors in the primary, including several who are here tonight. I see Bob Gray. Thank you for your help. Every single member of the Republican Georgia congressional delegation, our constitutional officers, the legislators, Governor Nathan Deal and First Lady Sandra Deal, Senator Perdue, Senator Isaacson, and my very close friend, Senator Saxby Chambliss. I need to also thank Speaker Ryan and the House leadership and so many of the members across this country who also united to help us hold the 6th. And a special thanks to the President of the United States of America, but let's not forget our equally great Vice President, Mike Pence. And I think it's appropriate to take a minute to acknowledge a new friend that I was able to make over the course of that campaign, and that was Majority Whip Steve Scalise. Right up until that tragic day on the ball field, Steve would drop me a text message every single week, just to make sure I was doing okay and hanging tough. I think he even called me the Terminator in one of them. Wasn't sure about that one, Steve, but hasta la vista. Let me just tell you. But really and truly, what happened on that ball field was a terrible tragedy. And we need to all continue to lift up Steve and the others who were injured that day. And we need to also lift up this nation so that we can find a more civil way to deal with our disagreements. Because in these United States of America, no one should ever feel their life threatened over their political beliefs and positions. And I say that, ladies and gentlemen, in regards to both sides of the political aisle. Through this campaign, I have had a really great joy of getting to know any number of our leaders in Washington. And let me tell you, even though within our own GOP family we sometimes have disagreements, these are fine men and women who are doing their level best for this country. I really am honored to be able to stand before you tonight and so extraordinarily humbled. But as everyone knows, most big things are not accomplished by one person alone. And I had a tremendous amount of support in this campaign from each and every one of you to a great campaign team. They really are. Yes, give them a hand. To individuals on the ground who put in countless hours knocking on doors and making phone calls in some of the hottest days ever, y'all. Whew. But through it all, everyone persevered. And then there's this guy. How about Steve Handel? This man is my heart. He tells you he's my #1 supporter, and I can tell you that in everything I have ever attempted to do in my life, he has been my #1 supporter. And there are no words to say how much I love you. A little while ago, I had the opportunity to speak with Jon Ossoff. He was more than gracious, and he thanked me for a spirited campaign. And I wish him and Alicia all the best in the new life that they are going to be starting. Now tonight I stand before you extraordinarily humbled and honored at the tremendous privilege and high responsibility that you and the people across the 6th District have given to me to represent you in the United States House of Representatives. I will do. We have had a legacy of tremendous leadership in the 6th District. Our very own Tom Price, who's now Secretary of the HHS. Now Senator Johnny Isakson. And former Speaker Newt Gingrich. These men, these statesmen, have created very, very big shoes to fill. And I will do my level best to live up to the standards that they have set. To the Jon Ossoff supporters, know that my commitments, they extend to every one of you as well. We may have some different beliefs, but we are part of one community, the community of the 6th District. And I will work just as hard to earn your confidence in the weeks and months ahead. And I give every Georgian this promise. My promise is to work every single day relentlessly to make our state and this country a better place. My pledge.
All right, Karen Handel giving her victory speech down in Atlanta. Again, the 6th District down in Georgia, and she is the winner. Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, lost that race. Very close for a district that's been Republican, voted Republican for the last 40 years. I want to bring my panel back in. David Axelrod, Gloria Borger, Dana Bash, Mark Preston, and Kevin Madden. Dana, I'm wondering what happens to, because you know, healthcare on the menu right now. What happens in the short term for what the agenda is for the Trump administration right now?
You know, I think this is one of the most potentially important implications. We talk a lot about the 2018 election, but the question is, what about tomorrow, literally tomorrow and the next day, as Senate Republicans are trying to hammer out an agreement amongst themselves on a piece of legislation to repeal and replace Obamacare. The fact that this Republican didn't lose, not so much that she won, but that she didn't lose, is one of the main things that is allowing Republican leaders to breathe a sigh of relief, because if she would have lost, and the Democrat in this race really did pound away on health care as an issue, there's no question that some skittish Republicans, and there are lots of them, would have taken that as an issue and said, you know what? This is not something we should touch right now, and perhaps moved away from it. Now, we don't know if this is definitely going to seal the deal amongst Republicans, that they can't come up with a piece of legislation that they can pass the United States Senate next week, but it certainly gives them a little bit more breathing room. And the one other thing that I wanted to point out, which is noteworthy, is that Karen Handel, we just heard from her, she is going to be the first Republican Congresswoman from the state of Georgia. There have been Democrats, but the first on the GOP side. Excuse me, Republican woman, I should say. Make sure that it's on the female side.
David, I was looking through your Twitter feed. You tweeted something, I can't find it now, but I think what you believe is that Jon Ossoff had a better chance initially than he did this time? Better chance of winning?
Well, I think there's no question. Look, before the first race, I think if you spoke to most Democrats and Republicans, they would tell you that his best chance was to win in that first race, where if he had gotten over 50%, he would have been elected, because the Republicans at that point were factionalized, they were divided. There were more than a dozen Republican candidates. Democrats were relatively unified behind him. What happened since that time is Republicans coalesced around Karen Handel in a Republican district, and they ran a very good race for her, and you could see it in the turnout today. They got those numbers way up in terms of Republican turnout at the polls today. It overcame the Democratic vote by mail advantage that Democrats were counting on. So yes, I think that he would have had a better shot. I mean, it may be in retrospect that his only shot was to win in that first election. He fell 1.5 points or something short, and now we know what the result is. I do want to say a couple of things. I think Larry Sabato is right. We are a very polarized country. We're more polarized than ever. Party really matters. People voted party today in a district that has a history of voting Republicans. This is sobering for Democrats because there aren't that many swing districts in the country. So I mentioned before there were 23 Republican reps in districts that Hillary Clinton won. They need 24 seats to win, so they'll have to do very well among those 23 against some popular incumbents in order to win. They're also going to have to do a better job of recruiting candidates. When the Democratic Party took over the House in 2006 after a period of Republican leadership, they did it in part because they had a very, very assiduous recruiting process to go and find competitive candidates district by district. John Ossoff was not the perfect candidate for that district. Democrats are going to have to focus on how they get the strongest possible candidates in those districts that they think may be competitive.
And, you know, their job may have gotten a little bit harder after tonight. I mean, you know, in talking to people who are on the campaign committees, there's no shortage of people in the Democratic Party who want to run, but you have to find the best candidates. And I also think, to add what David was saying, the Democratic Party right now is going to start going through the process of, well, should Ossoff have run more to the left? Was the message wrong? Why is Nancy Pelosi, for example, still such a target, a lucrative target for Republicans? And I was just looking at a tweet from Congressman Seth Moulton, who's a junior member of the House.
I read that earlier, and I called him Seth Mouton because where I'm from in Louisiana, it's more like Mouton. But he's saying, but basically, Gloria,
yeah, it's a wake-up call.
He said it's a wake-up call. You need to look at the future. We need to have better jobs as Democrats, he says.
Well, and also I think what he's talking about, I don't want to put words in his mouth, is take a look at our leadership. Let's stop talking about 2016. Let's take a look at our leadership. Let's see where we're going in the House. And so you can be sure that there's going to be a really vigorous debate inside the Democratic Party right now, not only because they lost this race, which they hoped they could win, but as we've all said, it's a Republican district, but also because they want to have a message. And they don't seem to coalesce around anything at this point, and that's problematic for them. Being anti-Trump is one thing, but maybe you need something else.
I want to hear from the Republican here because Republicans are saying right now the president is saying, take a look at us. We won. He's saying congratulations to Karen Handel on her big win in Georgia, 6th. Fantastic job. We are very proud of you, Kevin Madden.
Yeah, well, look, the president ought to take a victory lap here. He deserved it. He went all in on it. And he probably came in at just the right time, too. It was at the end where Republicans really needed to just fire up their base and turn out folks on Election Day. You know, there is something we have to be very aware of. There is Democrat enthusiasm out there. They are you know, coalescing around this resistance movement. The problem for them is it's just not enough. And they cannot be happy with moral victories. What they need are actual victories. And I think, you know, to Gloria's point, this is a party that's going through a transition. And they have not found a message in a post-Obama world. They haven't found out how to win in a post-Obama world. And so the thing that I'm encouraged about as a Republican is that Republicans do recognize that we do have, you know, maybe some headwinds that we're facing, but we're taking all the necessary steps to survive in this particular environment and to, you know, focus on how we have to message in suburban districts like this where maybe the president isn't as popular but can be used to counter-program that Democrat enthusiasm out there.
Are you surprised at all,
That is what
at all of
happened.
these wins, Kevin? Because if you you look at Georgia, the one there. If you look at the South Carolina race, so it was supposed to be a landslide. And the GOP only won by 2,000 votes. There was no Democratic money, no national attention. So what does it say about how voters in the Deep South acted without a national party influence?
Yeah, well, look, I'm not surprised. I think we are very polarized, and I think in these special elections, oftentimes when you do have weak candidates, like we have had in many of these in these special elections from both parties, usually the environment takes over, and because the environment is so polarized, these races are all going to be close. The one thing that I found encouraging throughout all of these primaries is that every time I talk to Republicans that are on the ground working in them, they're taking it seriously. They are not being complacent. They are raising the money. I mean, Karen Handel, for all the outside money that was out there, she raised $5 to $6 million by herself in hard money.
Thought. Thank you, Kevin Madden, the rest of the panel. Stick around when we come back. Much more in our breaking news. What tonight's big win for Republicans in Georgia means for Democrats, their hopes in the midterms. We'll be right back.
This is CNN Breaking News.
This is our breaking news at this hour. CNN projects Republican Karen Handel has defeated Democrat Jon Ossoff in that high-stakes special election down in Georgia. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Handel's win in Georgia's 6th denies Democrats their hopes for their first major victory of the Donald Trump era. Let's get right to CNN's Kaylee Hartung. She is at Karen Handel's headquarters down in Georgia. So Karen Handel kept Georgia's 6th district red. She thanked President Trump tonight. What's the latest, Kaylee?
Well, Don, the sentiment that you're hearing from Handel's supporters is that no amount of money can buy an election. It was something you heard Karen Handel say throughout the course of campaigning as Jon Ossoff continued to bring in millions upon millions of dollars, over $23 million, in fact, from his supporters, as we talk about this race being the most expensive in the history of the House of Representatives. But when Karen Handel took the stage here, after all the I's were dotted and all the T's were crossed, so that her campaign was confident it was the move to put her on stage, when she took the stage, she had a very different tone than what we heard as she campaigned. You know, throughout her campaigning, you heard her really bring up to light all of the negatives of Jon Ossoff, of course, that he was inexperienced, that he lived outside the district, that he didn't represent the people of this district and their concerns and their needs. Now, this has been a Republican stronghold for decades. A Republican has held this seat in Congress for more than 40 years. Well, that run will continue as the conservative folks of Georgia's 6th district galvanize to support Karen Handel. And another difference you could see tonight, Don, in Karen Handel's in her victory speech, you didn't hear her talk much about President Trump as she campaigned. I was at a rally on Saturday where she had 2 members of his cabinet on stage with her. Sonny Perdue, the former governor here, now the Secretary of Agriculture, and also Tom Price, who gave up this seat to become President Trump's Secretary for Health and Human Services. But even in that case, Karen Handel didn't use the president's name tonight. She thanked President Trump. We've seen his tweets, and this crowd chanted Trump, Trump, Trump as she thanked the president. A big win for Republicans tonight at a time they knew they had to, Don.
Yeah, and now it sounds like a victory celebration there that didn't before. Thank you, Kaylee Hartung. I appreciate that, live for us at Karen Handel's headquarters in Atlanta. Now I want to bring in CNN's Breonna Keeler live for us at Democrat Jon Ossoff's headquarters. Democrats across the country thought they could pull it off. They did in a very different mood tonight at Ossoff headquarters. Breonna.
It is a different mood. There's a lot of disappointment, I'll tell you that, Don, and talking to some folks who have been with the Ossoff campaign from the very beginning for months now. Certainly disappointed, dabbing away a few tears here or there, but I mean, you see some of the people behind me, they're still, I see some people enjoying beers behind me. They're not as disappointed as you might think. And part of that is because just talking to people, they really felt that they were part of something and they were just proud to even get close. I think they're so used to being in the political minority as Democrats in a district like this, that just to be involved in something for really the first time in many of their lives where they had a shot, there's something that they're really taking away from that. And so you might go to other parties where candidates have lost, and you might see a much more crestfallen mood, I would say, than even we're seeing right now. But talking to national Democrats, it's a different story, Don. I talked to one, I was texting with one who was close to this campaign, who said that they were in a fetal position because so much really went into this. They were really hoping, after losing some special elections, to have something to show for it. And even when I talk to Republicans and Democrats, and a lot of them say, you know what, you might not be able to extrapolate out from this race onto what's going to happen in the midterms, it certainly would have been nice for Democrats to have something that could inspire some others, especially as they search for a way to run against Donald Trump moving into the midterms next year. If you look at the campaign that Jon Ossoff ran, it was not the campaign of a liberal Democrat. He was talking about fiscal responsibility. He was talking about bipartisanship. He was trying to really appeal to independents and try to peel off some Republicans. So I think that for some Democrats, they look at that and they say, if that wasn't going to work, is that the roadmap forward? We're not exactly sure, but they are, Don, pointing to a number of races in the midterm that they say are going to be more competitive. Dozens of races, they say, that will be more competitive in the midterm as they search for a way forward.
Brianna Keeler, thank you for your reporting. I want to bring in my panel now. Let's bring in CNN senior political analyst Mark Preston, CNN political commentator Matt Lewis, political analyst Kirsten Powers, and political commentator Margaret Hoover. The president taking a victory lap tonight, as well he should, according to the panel earlier in the show. Mark Preston, the president tweeting out tonight, congratulations to Karen Handel on her big win in Georgia's 6th. Fantastic job. We are very proud of you. Earlier, Sean Spicer played down the national importance of this, but it was a win for the Trump administration.
Yeah, no question. I mean, look, imagine had Jon Ossoff had won tonight, we'd all be saying this was a loss for President Trump. He put his neck on the line. He went out and provided support for Karen Handel in the days leading up to this, including tweeting today, trying to get his supporters out to the polls, Don. So Donald Trump, who's had, has had a pretty rocky time here in Washington over the past few weeks, if not the past few months, can look at tonight and say, listen, this is a victory for me. This is a victory for my party. And quite frankly, as we're talking about, the Democratic Party in despair right now in trying to figure their way out of the woods, this is quite an adrenaline boost right now into a Republican Party, who in itself is trying to work throughout some things. So, yeah, this is a very big win for Donald Trump.
You have marked Democrats tonight saying, listen, the Democrats need to figure out their messaging. They need to think about the future. They need to talk about jobs. Right. The Democrats are having trouble.
Yeah, and there's going to be no answers, basically, what has come out tonight. Heading into this race, we saw the progressive liberal side wing of the party and the more establishment side of the party not necessarily agree with about how this race was going to be conducted. In the end, I think Jon Ossoff ran the best campaign he could have ran. Not a professional politician. Had he run too far to the left, he probably would have lost by a wider margin. This is a Republican district. The fact is, Democrats, progressives, liberals poured a lot of money into this race, and they still weren't able to convert. Doesn't mean in 2018 in the midterms they don't have a shot at taking back the House of Representatives, because they actually do. But tonight is a night for Republicans.
Mark, let me ask you about South Carolina, because it didn't get a lot of national attention, didn't get a lot of money from the Democratic Party. It was supposed to be a landslide for the Republican. It turned out it wasn't. It was only, by 2,000 votes. So what does that say to you? Without the National Party influence here.
Right. So I mean, look, I like to put this in golf terms. A par is a par is a par, meaning a win is a win is a win. In the end, Republicans won that. That was a Republican seat. Democrats performed a little bit better than they could. But the Democratic Party, the South Carolina Democratic Party, should be commended for their efforts of trying to get a ground game out, and I think that's what we saw in South Carolina. But in the end, as we close out this night, Don, Republicans went 4 for 4 and protected their 4 Republican seats.
All right,
that
Mark.
says something.
Kirsten Powers, let's bring you into this. Let's see, what does this mean for how Republicans and Democrats are going to run their races in the midterms in 2018?
Well, I think that's the big question, because actually, one of the big questions is, did did John Ossoff run a good campaign? And there was a lot of criticism from people who wanted him to be more of a warrior. He made this decision that he was going to run this really positive campaign, whereas the other side was not as positive. They made really a referendum on Nancy Pelosi and the bad liberals in Washington, D.C. Even one ad that was run by a third-party person, that got very ugly about the shooting.
The radio ad about President Obama mischaracterized.
Right, and so, I mean, it got pretty ugly on the other side. And so I think with all the money, the question is if he had been a little tougher, been willing to be a little tougher on Trump, would it have made a difference? And I think that's the question, like, does the civility thing work? And especially if you look at South Carolina, where you had a race that had none of the funding and yet had a closer margin than this race, it does make you wonder if it could have been run differently.
Remember there was the Montana race, Quist, the guy up there with the cowboy hat? If he had won, then it would have been, okay, we need these sort of populist Bernie Sanders. That's the model. Let's be Bernie Sanders. And then I think if Ossoff had won in Georgia instead, it would have been, no, we need, the Trudeau, Barack Obama, Macron, that model. We need that's the tech savvy guy, the young guy who can go into these districts that are, maybe used to lean Republican, but they're
I think Democrats would have taken any of those at this point.
But either way, you would have had a theory, a premise. You would have tested something,
That's right.
and you could have gone forward and said, this is our model, this is our template. Democrats have no model or template, nothing to show for these four races.
If you're a Democrat, I know that you're a Republican, but what do you think Democrats are thinking?
Well, that's I'm trying to walk in another man's shoes. Here you go. But truly, I mean, Republicans actually have a model for winning depending on what kind of district it is in a Trump era. You have somebody like Karen Handel who can put her head down and in her acceptance speech not even say the president's name. Yeah. Actually just say the President of the United States and not even say Donald Trump. It was the crowd who said Trump.
Trump, she
right?
didn't, right?
So Republicans sort of know, okay, do I side with Trump? Do I not side with Trump? They have a model depending on their district and depending on who they're for. Democrats don't. Yeah. I mean, and that's what's concerning. I mean, we have this saying that all politics is local, but in these special elections, all politics is national, and they don't have a national benchmark to, I mean, what are you running to be with Nancy Pelosi? Well, that's not going to help in a Republican-leaning district. So they actually don't have a formula at all.
Can I ask you something real quickly here? Because we were talking about, as we were watching Karen Handel and going through the commercial break, $50 million poured in for the most expensive congressional race in history. Does this say more about the Democrats or the Republicans, or what does this say for them?
Well, what it does say, I mean, what we would have said if he won is that you can pour just enough amount of money in, and you can buy the votes. Voters are mobilized by turnout and money, and that costs money. You would have heard a huge outcry that there should be. You wouldn't have heard anything about election reform and Citizens United. Mm-hmm. But now I think you'll hear that on the Democratic side. We have to have election reform. We have to get money out of politics because there's no way a Democrat, which frankly, that wasn't in play here.
This is not horseshoes, so close does not count. But is anyone surprised that it was this close? Aren't you guys surprised that it was this close in a district that's Republican
Tom Price, won this in November by 23 points. So it's definitely closer than it should have been.
So what's going on
but
there?
But see, here's another thing though that I think is concerning for Democrats is that this is the most highly educated Republican district in the country. Mm-hmm. So those are the voters that you're going to be the most likely to pick off. Those are going to be the ones that are most likely are going to turn against Donald Trump.
So why?
So if you're not able to turn them, I mean, I do think that they dislike Democrats more. I clearly look, this Pelosi message really worked, and this came straight from Paul Ryan basically running this message, and I think that party matters, that people don't cross party lines in this day and age.
The idea that Donald Trump is going to turn off Republican voters to the degree that they will then vote for Democrats, I think is a misnomer.
She needed Paul Ryan, right? And she needed the RNC, correct?
Well, and Paul Ryan has this outside group that really came in and spent a lot of money on the ground game to help Karen Handel did not get nearly as much attention as the tens of millions of dollars that Ossoff got. But I think Paul Ryan, very unsung hero in that race.
Mark Preston, you were part of the panel in the last hour, and I think the consensus was, at least from David Axelrod and a few others, is that it's 16 months from the next election. Don't get too far over your skis here. What do you say?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One, this is a moment in time, and this is a very important moment in time for President Trump. The bottom line is they needed this adrenaline push into their arm, you know, at a time when the Republican Party is struggling to try to get some things done here in Washington. And you know, there's been a lot of talk about disunity in the GOP. But again, they got that tonight. Democrats now really do need to find a message. You know, they need to figure out how they're going to run nationally. But they're not going to win back the House of Representatives, Democrats that is, if they try to run a national campaign. That's just not going to work for them. They're going to have to run these individual races. They're going to have to win 25 of them in a net win in order to take back the House. And that's extremely important, Don, because if that happens, then they're going to be able to subpoena President Trump. They're going to be able to cause all kind of havoc on the White House. So while this is a depressing time for Democrats, I'm fairly certain that those deep-pocketed donors who don't really like Donald Trump are going to continue digging down deep to try to win back the House of Representatives, to try to do what they can to cause havoc and chaos for Donald Trump as best that they can do. So Democrats, while they need to figure out where they're going, I wouldn't say it's lost for them, but for Republicans, this was important for them.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. When we come back, Democrats' hopes of a big win crushed tonight. I'll talk to one top Dem who says her party needs to do a better job reaching out to Republican voters. Our breaking news tonight, CNN projects Republican Karen Handel wins a special congressional election in Georgia's 6th, beating Democrat Jon Ossoff in the most expensive House race ever. Joining me now is a Democratic Congresswoman who has some advice for her party on how to reach out to voters they lost to the Republican Party. It's Illinois Representative Sherry Bustos, and she joins me now. Representative, thank you so much for joining us. So, what do you think?
You know, the outcome wasn't what we had hoped to have happen, but let's look at it from this perspective. Just in November, Representative Price won this seat as a Republican by 23 points. We just lost by 5 points tonight. So I'm going to take that away as a silver lining and saying, you know, we're moving in the right direction. We're inching the ball forward. We just didn't get in the end zone the way we had hoped to.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, I've been teasing you, saying you're coming up, telling the audience that you're going to have a message to your party about reaching out to Republican voters. What's your message?
Well, so I'm one of 3 co-chairs of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. This was a position where I, along with David Cicilline from Rhode Island and Hakeem Jeffries from New York, we were elected among our colleagues to help us craft what we're going to be talking about from a messaging perspective going forth. You know, right now, let's look at the timing. It is June. We don't have the midterm election till November of 2018, so we've got time to work on this. I do know this. It's not going to work for us just to have an anti-Trump message. I serve in a congressional district in northwestern Illinois that Donald Trump won, and I won by 20 points. And I've had a lot of my colleagues say, well, how do you make something like that happen? And I don't think it's anything overly complicated, but I show up. I do things that we call supermarket Saturdays, where I just walk up and down the aisles and ask people what's on their minds. I do something that we call Sherry on shifts, where I work alongside people, I job shadow them, and I talk with them about the last time they received a raise or what they do, were they able to take their families on vacation. I think, Don, more than anything, it's showing up and it's talking nonstop about the economy and jobs, and that we're going to fight for people who need us to fight for them.
Congresswoman, I want to ask you, because you talked about, you know, what committees you serve on, but this, you're the only member of a Democratic Party leadership from the Midwest. You have a new job teaching your fellow House Democrats how to talk to rural voters that the party has lost. Why do you think these voters have moved away from your party?
Well, in the last election, Donald Trump, frankly, had a message that resonated with people who haven't gotten a raise in the last 5 years,
who saw their jobs, like a plant in my district, Maytag, ship every last one of the jobs over to Mexico. We've seen so many of those stories, and when he talked about making America great again in very simple terms, that resonated with people who wanted hope. What we didn't talk about enough consistently was about jobs, the economy, and fighting for people who want better times ahead. And so from the day I announced that I was running for Congress, I'm now in my third term, and that's what I talk about every time I go home. It's what I do talk about in the supermarkets. It is what I talk about when I'm job shadowing people, and whatever I'm doing, that's what I talk about. Again, I don't think it's overly complicated than, that you work really hard. Because we in Congress, we make a good wage, so we better work hard. And number two, we better fight when we have a fight on our hands. And number three, even though we're in the minority party, we better show people that we are prepared to get results because we've been fighting so hard for them. And I think it's those three steps that I've been focused on, and I hope that as we go forth, that we'll be able to show people that that's what we are focused on as Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Congresswoman Sherry Bustos, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Say hello to Chicago.
Yeah,
next time you're
thanks,
there,
Zach.
to all my friends there. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I sure will. Thanks so much.
When we come right back, more on our breaking news. CNN projects Republican Karen Handel wins a special congressional election in Georgia's 6th. Plus, new approval numbers for President Trump. They aren't looking very good. Breaking news tonight, CNN projects Republican Karen Handel wins a special congressional election in Georgia's 6th, beating Democrat Jon Ossoff in the most expensive House race ever. Let's discuss now. CNN political commentators Brian Fallon and Kevin Madden are both here. Brian, there were tears at the Ossoff headquarters tonight. Democrats put in a lot into this race, a lot of money, a lot of effort. What went wrong?
Well, this race outcome tonight was a disappointment, Don. I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat it. In many ways, these special elections, as Democrats, we don't get to pick them. They've become open seats because Donald Trump selected members of his cabinet from seats that he thought were relatively safe. And these are not necessarily the bellwethers that necessarily can predict how the midterms will go and who might control Congress in 2018. But on the other hand, to a certain degree, the theory of how Democrats can recapture the House was tested tonight to a large extent because of the red nature of many of these seats that Democrats are going to need to win if they're going to take the 24 seats they need to switch control of the House. They're going to need to get some of those Republican-leaning independents that are turned off by Trump to vote for a Democrat. And we saw tonight that in Georgia 6 at least, Karen Handel was not Donald Trump. The distaste for Donald Trump did not necessarily transfer down to Karen Handel. And you have to give the Republicans credit. They ran a good race. There was a lot of outside money that came in. Paul Ryan's outside organization spent $6 million, I think, and they ran a good GOTV campaign, and we did not see the base disillusionment among Republicans that we thought we'd see.
Yeah, Kevin, Karen Handel, it was interesting Margaret Hoover picked it up. I didn't really pay close attention to it or didn't notice it, that Karen Handel, even in her speech, her victory speech, didn't mention the president by name. She said the president of the United States, but she stayed clear of him during the campaign. You think that's going to be the playbook for tight races heading into 2018?
Well, sure. I think in any race, you don't want to have to litigate it through the lens of a national election, particularly in congressional elections. What you do want to do in order to win is localize and personalize your appeal. These races are not run by generic ballots, and you try not to make them a referendum on a national environment. What you try to do is make it about the actual ballot and make it a contest between the two individuals. And I think Karen Handel did that in this race very well. And if anybody, if she wanted to introduce to this that became a problem for the Democrats, it was the prospect of having a Nancy Pelosi Democrat representing the 6th District of Georgia. So I think you'll continue to see this. I think many races are going to look at this race around the country who are Republicans and try to replicate it, knowing that, particularly in some of these suburban districts where there may be some headwinds at the president's profile, that personalizing and localizing it will be to their advantage.
What do Democrats, Brian, need to avoid? Because now you have Democrats coming out, they're criticizing other Democrats, saying, what Democrats should do in the future, and they need to look to jobs, they need a better message. What do they need to do from just, all shooting at each other?
Well, I do think, Don, that there is a worry here that you're going to try to see a one-size-fits-all approach dictated about how these candidates that are running in red-leaning districts should run, that they should all run the same type of race, have the same type of resistance message, which I don't think is the reality. In a midterm, that it's not usually a branding exercise for the national party. It's usually a referendum on the incumbent president. And I think in these races, as Kevin just said, you're going to see most Democratic candidates run campaigns that fit their district. I think what a lot of these Democratic challengers that will be running in 2018 will have to their advantage, which Jon Ossoff did not have in this campaign, is they'll be running against an incumbent Republican who in most cases has voted for this very unpopular, toxic even, health care proposal that may even be law, God forbid, by this point in November 2018. In this race, it was a bit of a jump ball. You had two people that were running against each other, neither of whom was in office. Karen Handel said that she'd support the proposal if she got to Washington, but she hadn't actually cast a vote for it. It allowed the two sides to sort of run a proxy war where Ossoff was riding an anti-Trump momentum and Handel, for her part, was trying to run against Nancy Pelosi. In the midterms, though, I think you're going to have an opportunity where you'll have Democrats that are running on their biography, running on a platform that's uniquely tailored to their district, and then running against their incumbents' voting record.
Yeah, but you'll have attention spread across the country and not just focused on one race.
And that will also help. That will also help Democrats. I really do think here that you have to tip your cap to the job that the NRCC and Paul Ryan's outside organization, the Congressional Leadership Fund, did in propping up Karen Handel's sagging campaign. With Jon Ossoff had a huge influx of money from progressive donors across the country. Handel was sort of at a disadvantage. They came in, propped her up, got that GOTV program up and running. They won't necessarily be able to goose turnout for Republicans across the country when they have 30, 40 seats to protect in November 2018.
Kevin, Brian mentioned the health care bill. What impact will this race have on the Republican agenda moving forward?
Well, I think that we have seen a logjam in Congress right now. I think that logjam has a lot of other ingredients that have led to it, other than what would happen in a special election. But clearly, if the opposite had happened tonight, if a Democrat had won in this district, so many members in districts that are competitive, it would have sent a shiver up their spine. I think there's a lot of people breathing easier now in Washington, and a lesson for a lot of them is that that you have to be for something. You have to be constantly proposing solutions and alternatives up on Capitol Hill, and then articulate those your vision to the voters in your particular district about what you've gone to Washington and how you focused on reform, whether it's been health care, energy, regulatory reform, tax reform, infrastructure. These are all the things that Paul Ryan and and Mitch McConnell and Republicans up on Capitol Hill have put forth. Doing that is going to be your salvation. An agenda that's forward-looking is going to be your salvation. So I think that you'll see a little bit more. You'll see Democrats. I think you'll see Republicans feeling a little bit more bullish on the agenda now.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate it. When we come right back, the latest on our breaking news: CNN projects Karen Handel has won Georgia's special House election. Plus, how health care played into the election, and why the details of the GOP bill are still secret, only days away from the Senate's vote. Here's our breaking news tonight. CNN projects Republican Karen Handel wins a special congressional election in Georgia's 6th district, beating Democrat Jon Ossoff in the most expensive House race ever. Let's discuss now. CNN political commentators Alice Stewart and Simone Sanders, Republican strategist John Brabender, and CNN contributor Jason Kander. I have to say, everything I needed to know or get from this segment, I just learned from these two ladies. So, gentlemen, good luck right here. And I say that because, Alice, this is your district. You know it very well. You grew up here. You're not surprised by tonight's results, are you?
No, this has been a solid Republican district for many, many years, starting with Newt Gingrich to Johnny Isakson to Tom Price, and it was going to stay that way, and mainly because Karen Handel represented the views and values of the people of this district, and Ossoff did not. He talked a good game. He talked as though he was a little bit more to the center, but in the end of the day, he was a stock and trade liberal. He supported climate change proposals. He supported minimum wage. He supported issues that just weren't reflective of this district.
Oh, that's so bad. Minimum wage and climate change. Oh, my goodness.
promise, save the whales. It's so horrible.
I told you guys, go ahead. But you cannot be surprised, Simone,
Look,
that a Republican won in Georgia.
Not
Come
to say that Democrats can't win in Georgia, though, because you know what? I'm pulling for Stacey
I didn't say
Abrams
that, but
in the governor's race. But I will say this. Look, in this particular district, in this particular race, I think my colleague Brian Fallon said it best. This was a special election. It wasn't like the Democrats, panned this out, picked it, and said, this is a race we know we can win. I think we made a good run. I also think it's important to note that early vote mattered here. And in order for Democrats to win and do well, Democrats really would have needed to run up the early vote numbers in a range of like 54 to 55, 56%. When the numbers were coming in at 49 to 52%, we knew it spelled trouble because Republicans were going to be the ones that turned out and turned up on election day.
Jason Kander, are you discouraged by this loss tonight?
Well, look, you'd rather win than lose, no doubt. Absolutely. So it's disappointing. But we should look at what's been happening in these deep red districts where the special elections are happening, is that in each one of them, the Republicans are getting fewer votes than they got in November, and the Democrats are getting more votes. The margin is getting closer in each one of them. So while the Democrats have not won these races, what's happening is, as the Republicans celebrate this like they won the World Series tonight, they're really just ignoring the fact that this is a game that started where they got 20 runs to, a 20-run lead to start the game, and they're celebrating close wins. So what that means is voters are trying to send a message to the Republicans, which is they don't like what they're doing on health care. They don't like that they're following President Trump in a lot of things that they don't like. It's happening in districts that are deep red, but it clearly should say something that the Republicans are choosing to ignore.
John Brabender, what do you say?
Well, I love hearing the Democrats talk about this because what they're basically saying is they want a participation trophy for coming in a good second. No. And the truth of the matter is, since Donald Trump got elected president, the Republicans in special elections are undefeated. And what's particularly interesting about this race is more than any of the others, this took on a national election. And Karen Handel was probably a couple points down a week ago, ends up winning by 5 points, not even that close. And I think that she actually picked up numbers because Republicans showed up and wanted to show that there was not buyer remorse in voting for Donald Trump or his agenda. So however you look at this, it was a good night for Republicans.
So, wait, I want to be clear that I want to be clear. This was not a referendum on Donald Trump as we would have liked for it to be. No, Karen Handel, as Margaret Hooper said, didn't even use Donald Trump's name on the stage tonight. What they ran on locally, but they talked about health care, they talked about the economy. Those were the issues that they talked about. And the Republicans, frankly, they attacked Jon Ossoff, and he didn't attack back. And where you just sometimes you got to fight back. So not to say that this is not an indication that everybody is just happy with Donald Trump. People are not happy with Donald Trump, but they are more so not happy with these Republican policies. And we need to be careful not to think that this special election is an indication of what's happening for 2018. There's real potential for Democrats in 2018.
One thing I will say that's also ran a good race. Jason, I know that you worked out there and campaigned with him. It was a good race. But at the end of the day, whether Karen Handel won by 5 points or 4 or 3 or 50, a win is a win. And there's a check in the W column, and that's all that really matters.
And Jason, how do you square that? Because if you look at, let's put this poll numbers up. This is the latest CBS poll. President Trump's approval rating is at 36%. His disapproval at 57%. So how do you square all of these losses with the president's approval rating?
These are Republican districts, and these candidates, the party, everybody knew that going in.
Why isn't this translating into victories for Democrats then?
Because these are Republican districts, and we're gonna keep going at it. We're gonna keep competing everywhere. We've got people who are fired up, but it's really important. The whole reason we're talking about this right now is because people are curious what it means for November of 2018, right? That's why it's a conversation. And what it means for November of 2018 is that in each of these cases, the Democrats are coming a whole lot closer to winning than they've ever come in these districts that there's no record, or not much of a record of Democrats winning in these 4 races that have happened.
It sounds like.
So my point is, it's indicative of momentum toward November of 2018.
I mean, it sounds like John Brabender's point, though, when John Brabender says participation trophies.
That's not what I'm saying at all. I would rather we win, Don. There's no question I would rather we win.
But here's
I'm just
the
saying
bigger
Republicans
problem.
are making a huge mistake if they pretend that they're winning these by massive margins and that these aren't Republican districts. They are Republican districts, and we are making gains.
Democrats keep saying these are Republican districts. You know what's happening? we're becoming more and more Republican districts. So if you're
Thanks
just
to
going to keep the status
we want to
quo,
be
we're
clear.
going to be
Thanks
in
to
the majority.
gerrymandering, because in this district, Georgia 6,
Well,
and
wait a
also
minute,
in
wait a
South
minute.
Carolina,
Let's-
there was gerrymandering by Republican state legislatures, because had there not been Republican gerrymandering in South Carolina, for example, South Carolina District 5 would have been a mostly black district
First
and a
of all, the
Democratic
misnomer
voting-leaning
is
district. So
the
let's
only
be very
way
clear about
the only
why
way
there's
you
more
can make a
Republican
district, the only way you can make a district more Republican is to make another district more Democrat. And so
Okay,
that
look,
argument doesn't hold.
That's first of all doesn't make any sense.
Thank
but second,
you, Jason.
let's talk about what this is. This is a situation where these districts that have been close races, these 4 districts, if in November 2018 the Democrats were to win any of these districts, that would not be indicative of a Democratic wave. That would be indicative of a Democratic monsoon. So I'm just saying, like, I congratulate my Republican friends on these victories, but we should talk about the facts. We should talk about reality. This is, like I said, about a game that started with a 20-point, you spot the other team 20 points at the beginning. That's what it is.
How much impact did all this national money and all this advertising have on this race versus the race in South Carolina, which had none of that, and the Democratic candidate actually came closer, Alice?
Well, I think the Hollywood liberals are going to realize they should have spent their money on saving the planet instead of trying to win a race here in Georgia. And look, at the end of the day, it's no surprise Jon Ossoff was the savior for the Democrats and the anti-Trump resistance for the last several weeks and months. And now it's no surprise that they're going to say that Ossoff's a bad candidate and they're going to blame gerrymandering for the reason
No
for
one
his
said
loss.
Ossoff was a bad candidate. I want to be very clear. Look, he ran a good race. We did not win.
You
But
said
to
he wasn't the ideal
I
candidate.
said he was not the ideal candidate. But he ran a good race, and no, we didn't win. But to note that this is some knock over the head to the Democrats and the Democratic Party, and we're in deep doo-doo, for lack of a better term, for 2018, is absolutely egregious, and it's a reach. It's a real reach.
It sounds like, though, I mean, as we're sitting here talking about it, like, if you were just tuning in, you would think that Jon Ossoff was running for president.
Oh my God, yes! That Jon Ossoff was running not only for president, and that he had the backing of every single body everywhere, and we were out there up front from the beginning saying, this is our race and we're going to win it.
Well, this is a great night for Karen Handel. There's cheers across the district in Georgia. No more TV ads, no more knock on doors, no more mail pieces on this race, and people can go about their lives and live happily ever after.
Okay, so let's talk about what this means for the Republican agenda moving forward, especially as it relates to health care. Sean Spicer today saying the president had not seen the latest health care bill. Watch this.
I don't know that. I know that there was some chatter today. I know the president has been on the phone extensively with the leader and with key senators, so I don't know if he's seen the legislation or not, but I know that they've been working extremely hard, and the president has been giving his input and his ideas, feedback to them, and he's very excited about where this thing is headed.
Do you know if anyone on the staff has seen a draft of the bill?
I don't.
There could be a vote next week. How surprising is it that the president, according to Sean Spicer, doesn't know about this?
Not surprising to me.
After the break. We'll be right back. And we're back now with my panel. So, Simone, we're talking about Jon Ossoff made this about health care. People are wondering if it should have gone harder against President Trump. So what do you think is the strategy here? Because we saw Sean Spicer before the break saying he doesn't think the president has seen the bill.
Look, I think we can argue about what Ossoff did or didn't do right or did do wrong all day. But I think we could put a pin in that. And right now, I think folks need to fight like hell to keep Trump care from becoming law. It doesn't surprise me that the president hasn't seen the bill because there are lawmakers who are on the team that is supposed to be crafting this bill that haven't seen it. I think it's very problematic, and this is something that's going to affect every single person in America. That's what we need to be focused on.
Do you have concerns that no one has seen the bill, or
Yeah.
very few people?
Absolutely. I talked with some leaders in the Senate today, and they haven't seen it yet. And the plan is for the Senate leadership to drop the text on their lap on Thursday and expect them just to sign off. They're not going to do it. So while I agree the sausage making of legislation is boring and tedious, they need to have a little bit more buy-in from Republicans and Democrats if they want to get this passed.
So, John, how does it benefit Republicans to keep this bill so secret?
Well, first of all, I don't think they are. I think Thursday we're going to find a lot about it. Second of all, the CBO will score this thing. There will be a lot of debate about it. The only people that really aren't engaged in the process, I think, are the Democrats for two good reasons. One is they're going to oppose it no matter what. We know that. They've made it clear that they're going to oppose this president's agenda no matter what. Second of all, let's remember, they were the architect.
They were the architect. There were a lot of Republicans who were saying they hadn't seen the bill either. It's not just Democrats.
I agree, and that will be rectified. But let's be clear: the Democrats were the architects of the legislative Titanic called Obamacare, which is now 3/4 underwater. I don't know what role they could be there for, other than to tell us what not to do.
Yeah.
I would venture to say Obamacare is maybe underwater right now, probably because the president has tanked the subsidies. He's threatened to withhold subsidies, which is why you have insurers who are pulling out of these markets. And so, no, Obamacare is not perfect. Premiums are too damn high in some places, and it needs to be fixed. But to say that the solution is to totally repeal it, take health care away from potentially 23 million people in America, make having a vagina a pre-existing condition.
You do know,
that's
even Bill Clinton called Obamacare crazy before the election.
It's problematic. I think
before
we're on the same
Donald
page
Trump
there.
was even
We're
president.
talking about the fact that people ain't seen the bill. Let's just be frank here. We have yet to see the bill. Show us the bill. Why can we not see the bill?
Which I would argue, then don't complain about it until they show you what they're going to do on Thursday.
That is preposterous.
Okay, but John, we have to pass the bill before we know what's in it. Who am I quoting there?
Nancy Pelosi.
Now you on the side of Nancy Pelosi? Y'all were just barbecuing Auntie Nancy 5 minutes ago.
Don, the reason we haven't
big...
seen the bill.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
The reason we haven't seen the bill, it ain't because it's so good and they're just hoping to surprise us. The reason we haven't seen the bill is because they know people aren't going to like it. I mean, the House version was polling at 17% popularity. They're trying to make it slightly less awful, I guess. I don't know. But they won't show it to us because they know that if people see it, they're going to say don't pass it. And the situation right now is, what we need to have happen for everybody watching at home, you need to call your senators, because if 3 Republican senators have the courage, I can't even believe it takes courage to do this, because I don't think it does, but if they have the courage to say, you know what, I think that we should actually let the American people see the bill before we decide whether or not to change health care dramatically in this country.
Since
if
we
they
work
have
for
the
the
courage to
American
do
people.
that.
But you know what?
If they have the courage to, they don't even have to say they vote no. Just they'll say they're not going to vote until that happens. If they just summon a little bit of courage, that can happen.
Good, John.
Do you agree that Obamacare is imploding? I mean, let's look at this contextually. What the Republicans are doing is
I agree. You're
bringing a
trying to
life
kill it
wrap.
on the Republican
They're getting
side.
help. Well, look, it's killing under its own weight. It's a failure. I think we should all be able to agree on that. That's why all the insurance companies
So we should probably,
first
of all, that's not true. Second, that doesn't mean we should get rid of health care for 23 million people.
Well, look,
no,
but
that's
the
not a
reality
solution
is,
to a
you
problem.
can give people more choices.
John is right. Obamacare is failing and under its own weight. This was passed and sold to the American people that you would, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, which isn't true. You can have greater choice and lower costs, which isn't true. And in many areas of the country, you have one choice for health insurance. That is not quality, affordable health
all
care.
of that can be debated. But my initial question was, why the lack of transparency? And the soundbite is too long to play, but we had all these Republicans back in 2009 and 2010 saying, how can you not, how dare these Democrats do that? We should know what's in the bill. They're doing this under the cloak of darkness, and now the same thing is happening, and they're saying, but it's okay now.
But it's not, I would say it's not the same thing.
It's hypocrisy, Don.
It is. I agree with Jason. It is hypocrisy, but it's not the exact same thing, because guess what? In 2009, there were hearings. President Obama went on a tour across the country explaining the bill and what he wanted to do to people. There were 6 months, at least, 6 months to a year of hearings. Folks are trying to ram this through in 3 months.
I forget who it was. It was the Democrat who was on, I think it was a Democrat. It may have been just a commentator who was on last night, and they said, well, it's easier because you're not starting from the beginning. Basically, they're trying to, even though it's different legislation, that was the point. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, here's what's happening, Don. What's happening right now is you've got a Republican political strategy. Okay, fine. We've got a Republican political strategy that's worked for a few years, which is just make up lies about Obamacare and criticize it, and now they're trying to turn that into a policy, and that policy is just get rid of this, lose health care for 23 million people. It is a good political strategy for them.
That's it.
It is not a good policy for the country.
We're done. Thank you all. I'm sorry, John, that's the last word. Karen Handel won tonight, by the way, down in Georgia. Our continuing coverage will continue right after this with John Voss and Amara Walker. I'm Don Lemon. Thanks for watching.